Tanner Perry was 42 and looked like the kind of man people forgot to invite back. He wore a faded Navy maintenance jacket, drove an old Ford F-150 through downtown Denver before sunrise, and drank burnt coffee every morning at a diner on Blake Street. Most people believed his ex-wife had been the successful one. What they didn't know was that the energy system running half the buildings around Lodo had been designed on Tanner's laptop in a motel room 3 years earlier. Then Tanner stepped into the glass boardroom on the 31st floor and stopped cold. Lauren Perry was sitting at the far end of the table, and behind the board nameplates sat Grant Holloway, Emily Carter, and Jason Mercer, the same friends she once convinced to cut him off completely. Before we continue, comment your country and local time below. And if you enjoy stories where quiet people let the truth speak for them, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story gets even colder. Tanner Perry met Lauren Whitaker in October of 2007 at a University of Colorado alumni fundraiser in downtown Denver. The event was held inside a renovated brick hotel near Larimer Square. Expensive bourbon, jazz piano in the corner, men in tailored jackets, pretending not to look at each other's watches. Tanner almost didn't go. He had spent the entire afternoon inside a server room at a medical supply company in Centennial, replacing cooling units after a power fluctuation burned through 2 backup systems. By 7 o'clock, his shoulders ached, and his hands still smelled faintly like machine oil. Lauren noticed him because he wasn't trying to be noticed. While other men hovered around the open bar, telling stories too loudly, Tanner stood near the windows overlooking Market Street, quietly rotating the ice in his glass while studying the snowfall outside. Lauren walked over first. "You look like you hate these events," she said. Tanner glanced toward the crowd. "I don't hate them. You just look trapped." "That too." She laughed immediately. Easy, warm, practiced. Lauren Whitaker had the kind of face people trusted quickly. Blonde hair always perfect. Sharp cheekbones softened by a permanent smile. She worked in public relations for a commercial real estate firm called Easton Urban Development, and she understood something Tanner never did. People liked confidence more than honesty. Still, the beginning felt real. For the first 2 years, they worked well together in the strange way opposites sometimes do. Lauren filled silence easily. Tanner preferred listening. Lauren liked restaurants with reservation lists 3 weeks long. Tanner liked diners where the coffee was terrible, but always hot. They married in spring of 2010 at a small venue outside Boulder. Grant Holloway stood beside Tanner as best man. Jason Mercer nearly got thrown out of the reception after trying to race a golf cart across wet grass. Emily Carter cried during the vows, even though she barely admitted it afterward. Back then, the group felt permanent. Sunday football at Jason's house, wine nights at Grant's condo near Wash Park, summer rooftop parties downtown. Lauren fit naturally at the center of all of it. Tanner never did. He was quieter than the others, less polished. While Grant argued mergers and acquisitions over drinks, and Jason bragged about logistics contracts across Arizona, Tanner usually sat near the edge of conversations with a beer in his hand, listening more than speaking. People mistook that for a lack of ambition. Lauren slowly started believing it too. At first, the comments sounded harmless. You know, she told him once while getting ready for a charity dinner, people might connect with you more if you talked about yourself occasionally. Tanner adjusted the cuff on his shirt. I talk when I have something to say. That's exactly the problem. Another time during dinner with Emily and Grant, Lauren laughed and said, if Tanner could marry his laptop, he probably would. Everyone laughed. Tanner smiled politely because that was easier than explaining he'd spent 6 months building a predictive energy model after midnight every night. At the time, he still worked as a systems engineer for a building automation contractor in Denver Tech Center. The pay was decent, the hours were brutal, but every night after work, Tanner disappeared into the garage behind their Cherry Creek house. Lauren thought he was wasting time. What Tanner was actually building was the first version of a machine learning energy optimization platform capable of reducing power waste in commercial buildings. The idea came after years inside overheated server rooms and malfunctioning HVAC systems. He saw how much energy large buildings wasted because nobody could predict load shifts accurately in real time. So he built something that could. At first it was ugly. Half the code barely held together. The interface looked like software from 1998, but it worked. Tanner tested small simulations against archived data from office towers around Denver. Night after night, the numbers improved. 7% savings, 9%, 12, then 15. He kept folders full of handwritten calculations stacked inside old Home Depot boxes in the garage. Lauren barely looked at any of it. One night she stepped into the garage holding a glass of wine while Tanner stared at 4 monitors glowing blue in the dark. "You're seriously spending another Friday on this?" Tanner rubbed his eyes. "I'm close to solving something." Lauren leaned against the doorway. Tanner, normal people don't spend their lives trying to reinvent air conditioning. It's not air conditioning. Whatever it is, nobody cares about utility software. Tanner looked back toward the screen. That sentence stayed with him longer than he expected. Nobody cares. A year later, Lauren started getting promoted faster. Bigger clients, bigger commissions. Her firm handled several luxury developments across downtown Denver, and Lauren thrived around investors, brokers, and executives. Tanner attended dinners where conversations revolved entirely around appearances. Who upgraded houses? Who bought vacation property in Aspen? Who joined which club? Lauren adapted naturally to all of it. Tanner looked more out of place every month. The first serious crack appeared during a rooftop party in Rhino. Jason had just signed a major distribution contract. Grant was discussing a partnership deal worth millions. Everyone drank expensive whiskey while downtown lights reflected against the windows. Someone asked Tanner what he was working on. Before he could answer, Lauren smiled and said, "Honestly, mostly weird energy spreadsheets." The group laughed lightly. Tanner noticed Emily glance at him, waiting for him to respond. He didn't. Lauren continued, "I keep telling him to stop acting like he's secretly building the next Tesla." More laughter. Tanner took a sip of bourbon and stared out over Brighton Boulevard. He wasn't angry yet, just tired. That night after they got home, Lauren kicked off her heels in the kitchen and said, "You could at least try to be social." "I was social. You barely spoke." Tanner opened the refrigerator. People were talking. "That's not how networking works." He stayed quiet. Lauren folded her arms. "You know what your problem is?" Tanner closed the fridge slowly. "You think being quiet makes you mysterious. It doesn't. It makes people uncomfortable." The sentence landed harder than she realized. Not because Tanner believed it, because he started noticing she repeated versions of it to other people. Small comments first. Tanner's just difficult sometimes. He isolates himself. He gets obsessive. Tiny things. Individually harmless. Together, dangerous. By late 2017, Tanner noticed invitations slowing down. Group texts became shorter. Golf weekends happened without him. Grant stopped calling as often. Jason canceled plans twice in 1 month. Emily still spoke to him kindly, but even she seemed cautious now. Lauren always had explanations ready. You know how busy everyone is. People grow apart. You've been distant too. But Tanner began seeing patterns. One Friday night, he came home early from a service call in Aurora. The house lights were low. Lauren was in the dining room, speaking softly on the phone. She hadn't heard the garage door open. Tanner stopped near the hallway when he heard his own name. "No, I'm serious," Lauren said quietly. "You only see the calm version of him." Silence. Then she laughed once. If people knew what he was really like, nobody would stick around. Tanner stood motionless in the dark hallway. Lauren kept talking. And for the first time in 12 years, Tanner realized the silence inside his marriage wasn't accidental. Someone had been filling it for him. The dinner happened 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Lauren chose the restaurant, not Tanner, not by accident. It was a downtown Denver steakhouse with black leather booths, brass lamps, and servers who never wrote anything down. The kind of place where men spoke in low voices about acquisitions and women laughed softly behind wine glasses that cost more than Tanner's monthly truck insurance. Tanner arrived 6 minutes early. He always did. He parked his old Ford F-1503 blocks away because valet parking made him uncomfortable. The November air cut through his coat as he walked past wet sidewalks and glowing restaurant windows. Snow had started falling lightly, not enough to stick, just enough to make the streetlights look blurred. Inside, Lauren was already seated. That told him something. Lauren hated arriving early unless she needed to control the room. Grant Holloway sat beside her in a charcoal suit. Emily Carter was across from him, checking something on her phone. Jason Mercer leaned back with one arm over the booth, already halfway through a whiskey. Natalie Brooks sat next to Emily, wearing a red coat folded neatly over her lap. Tanner paused at the hostess stand. Lauren looked up and smiled. It was the smile she used in public. Clean, bright, empty. "There he is," she said. Jason lifted his glass. "Tanner, thought you got lost in a boiler room somewhere." Tanner slid into the open seat at the end of the booth. "Traffic on Spear." Lauren touched his arm lightly, too lightly, like an actress hitting a mark. "We ordered appetizers," she said. "You don't mind?" No. He did not mind the appetizers. He minded the way everyone had gone quiet for half a second when he arrived. The first 20 minutes moved normally. Jason talked about expanding a cold storage route into Salt Lake City. Grant complained about a client who wanted Silicon Valley terms with a Denver budget. Emily mentioned a financing issue at Summit Ridge Properties. Natalie asked Lauren about a luxury condo campaign near Union Station. Lauren performed beautifully. She laughed at the right places, asked questions that made people feel intelligent, refilled attention around the table like water. Tanner cut his steak slowly and listened. Then Grant turned toward him. "What about you, Tanner? Still working on that energy thing?" It was a simple question. Tanner looked up. "Yes." Lauren smiled before he could say more. "He's always working on something," she said. Jason grinned. That sounds dangerous. It would be? Lauren said if any of it ever left the garage. The table laughed. Not cruelly. Not yet. Tanner set his knife down. He could have explained the model. He could have told them he had run simulations across 42 commercial building profiles. That the newest version was predicting peak energy load with better accuracy than the software his employer licensed for 6 figures a year. He could have told them the system had identified a cooling cycle error in a medical office building that saved the client $9,000 in 1 month. Instead, he picked up his water glass. Lauren watched him over the rim of her wine. Emily noticed. Tanner saw that too. There was always a moment before people chose sides. Usually it passed so quietly, no one could name it later. Lauren leaned back. The truth is, she said, I worry about him sometimes. The sentence changed the temperature at the table. Grant's smile faded slightly. What do you mean? Lauren looked down like she regretted speaking. Tanner felt his jaw tighten. She had practiced this. I don't want to get into it at dinner, she said. Jason shifted in his seat. Come on, Lauren. You can't say that and stop. Lauren gave a small, tired laugh. Tanner heard the softness in it, a weapon wrapped in velvet. It's just been a hard year, she said. Tanner gets very focused. And when things don't go right, he shuts everyone out. Tanner looked at her. Lauren. She did not look back. I'm not attacking you, she said gently. That was worse than anger. Anger could be answered. Gentleness made him look guilty before he opened his mouth. Emily put her phone face down. Tanner, she said carefully. Are you okay? He nodded once. I'm fine. Lauren exhaled, almost invisible. That's what he always says. No one touched their food for several seconds. Tanner could hear plates moving in the kitchen. A server laughing near the wine room. Ice cracking inside Jason's glass. Grant looked uncomfortable. Jason looked curious. Natalie looked like she already believed Lauren. Emily looked torn. Tanner had seen electrical panels fail in slow stages. A flicker first, a hum, then heat behind the wall. By the time anyone smelled smoke, the damage had already spread. This felt like that. Lauren continued carefully. He doesn't like me talking about this, she said. But there are days where I don't know which version of him I'm coming home to. Tanner's hand went still around the glass. There it was. Not a direct accusation, something worse. A shape people could fill with whatever fear they already carried. Grant cleared his throat. Maybe this isn't the place. You're right, Lauren said quickly. I'm sorry. But she was not sorry. Tanner knew because she reached for her wine immediately after and took a slow sip. The dinner never recovered. Jason tried to restart a conversation about the Broncos. Natalie asked about holiday plans. Grant ordered another round. Emily asked Tanner one question about work, but her voice had changed, careful now. Measured. As if he had become fragile at the table. Tanner answered plainly. No one followed up. When the check came, Grant took it before anyone else could. I've got this. Normally Jason would argue. He didn't. Outside, the snow had thickened. The valet stand glowed under a heat lamp. Lauren waited near the curb while Tanner went to get the truck. He walked the 3 blocks alone with his collar turned up shoes crunching through the thin white layer forming over the sidewalk. His phone buzzed. A message from Jason. Good, seeing you tonight, man. Take care of yourself. Tanner stared at it under a streetlight. Take care of yourself. 3 words people sent when they wanted distance without guilt. He did not reply. By the time he brought the truck around, Lauren was standing under the restaurant awning with her arms folded. Snow collected lightly in her hair. She looked calm. Too calm. Tanner unlocked the doors. Neither of them spoke until they pulled out onto 18th Street. The windshield wipers scraped back and forth. Lauren watched the city pass outside. "You embarrassed me tonight," she said. Tanner kept both hands on the wheel. "I embarrassed you. You sat there like a wall. You lied about me." She turned her head slowly. "I told them I was worried. You told them to be afraid of me." Lauren laughed once quietly. "That's your problem, Tanner. You hear one thing and twist it into an attack." He stopped at a red light. The glow washed across her face. For a second, he saw her clearly. Not angry. Not scared. Certain. That was what disturbed him most. She believed control was the same thing as truth if she reached enough people first. The light changed. Tanner drove on. Over the next month, the circle closed. Grant canceled golf first. "Sorry, buried with work." "Let's find another time." There was no other time. Emily stopped sending Tanner commercial property articles she thought he would enjoy. When he emailed her a question about utility data in multi-tenant buildings, she replied 4 days later with 2 sentences and no warmth. Jason stopped calling during Sunday games. Natalie removed Tanner from a group chat about a Christmas party and blamed it on cleaning up old threads. Lauren noticed all of it. Of course she did. She moved through the house with quiet satisfaction, never mentioning the missing calls directly. Tanner began documenting, not dramatically, not obsessively, methodically. He created a folder on an encrypted drive. Dates, screenshots, messages, calendar changes, emails, notes after conversations. He did not know yet what he would need. He only knew that memory became useless when people decided not to believe it. One night in December, after another party invitation arrived, addressed only to Lauren Tanner, found her in the garage. She stood near his workbench, looking at the monitors, the notebooks, the server logs taped along the wall. "This is sad," she said. Tanner closed the laptop halfway. "What is this?" She gestured around the garage. "You sitting out here pretending this is going somewhere." He did not answer. Lauren stepped closer. "You think if you build something, everyone will realize they were wrong about you?" Tanner looked at her then. Her voice stayed low. "But they won't. Because people don't care what you build if they don't like who you are." Snow tapped softly against the garage window. Tanner stood. Lauren smiled faintly. By the end of the year, she said, "You'll have nobody left." Then she walked back into the house and shut the door behind her. Tanner remained in the garage for a long time. The old space heater clicked near his feet. His monitors glowed across the workbench. Outside, Denver disappeared behind a curtain of white. At 11:43 p.m., Tanner opened the folder on his encrypted drive. He added one new note. Lauren's statement, garage, December 14th. Threatened social isolation. Then he saved it, backed it up, and returned to the code. Lauren filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning in January. Tanner found out at 6:42 a.m. while standing in line at a diner near Blake Street, waiting for coffee and scrambled eggs. The envelope had been taped to his front door overnight. Official, cold. A thick packet from Cole and Bender Family Law. The waitress behind the counter called his name twice before Tanner realized he had stopped moving. Outside, snowmelt ran along the gutters under gray Denver skies. Traffic crawled slowly toward downtown. A construction crew hammered steel somewhere across the street. Tanner sat alone in the booth nearest the window and opened the packet carefully. Lauren Whitaker Perry versus Tanner Michael Perry. Irreconcilable differences. Request for division of marital assets. Request for temporary residence rights. Request for disclosure of all technology-related business interests. Tanner read the last line twice, then once more. Not because he was surprised, because Lauren had finally confirmed something he suspected for months. She knew the software mattered now. The waitress approached carefully with his plate. "You okay, hon?" Tanner folded the packet closed. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Just paperwork." He left $20 on the table untouched and walked back outside. The air smelled like wet concrete and diesel fuel. For several minutes, he sat inside the truck without starting it. Most people imagine divorce beginning with screaming, lawyers, broken dishes, slamming doors. Tanner discovered it could begin with something much quieter. Precision. Lauren had timed it perfectly. By January, most of the friend group had already drifted away from him. Socially isolated people looked unstable faster, easier to doubt, easier to frame as emotionally disconnected. Lauren understood perception better than Tanner ever would, and now perception had become legal strategy. That evening, Tanner came home early. Lauren sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone beside a glass of white wine. The television played muted news coverage in the background. She did not look nervous, only prepared. "You got the papers," she said. Tanner placed the envelope on the counter. "Yes." Lauren nodded slowly. "I think this is best." "For who?" "For both of us." The answer arrived too quickly. Tanner opened the refrigerator and stared at leftovers he no longer wanted. "You're claiming rights to my software." Lauren crossed one leg calmly. "You built it during the marriage. I built it before sunrise and after midnight while working full-time. That doesn't change anything legally." Tanner closed the refrigerator door. "Have you even seen the code?" Lauren sighed. "Tanner, this is exactly what I mean." "What?" You get obsessive immediately. There it was again, the same framing. Every disagreement became evidence of instability. Every defense became aggression. Tanner leaned against the counter quietly. "You've been preparing this for a while." Lauren finally looked directly at him. "I've been surviving this for a while." He almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the sentence sounded rehearsed. By the next morning, Tanner contacted Robert Whitmore. Grant Holloway would have been the obvious choice once. Grant specialized in corporate law and M&A disputes downtown. But Tanner no longer trusted that line between friendship and loyalty. Robert Whitmore operated differently. His office sat inside an older brick building near Civic Center Park. No modern branding, no polished marble lobby, just shelves full of legal binders and framed certificates faded by sunlight. Robert himself looked closer to a retired history professor than a divorce attorney. Gray hair, steel-rimmed glasses, slow voice, careful eyes. He read the divorce filing silently while Tanner sat across from him. After 10 minutes, Robert removed his glasses. "Did you document your development process?" "Yes." How thoroughly? Tanner slid a flash drive across the desk. Server logs, version history, purchase receipts, registration records, timestamps, source backups. Robert stared at him for a moment. "You expected this?" Tanner looked toward the office window. "No," he said. "I prepared for it." That answer changed something. Robert inserted the drive into his computer and began opening folders. Thousands of files, version records dating back years, cloud backups, code commits, hardware invoices, energy simulations, handwritten notebooks scanned into PDFs. Lauren had underestimated one thing about Tanner. Quiet men notice patterns, and men who notice patterns tended to keep records. Over the next 3 months, the divorce unfolded through conference rooms and legal filings instead of emotional conversations. Lauren moved quickly. She requested temporary possession of the Cherry Creek house, requested partial ownership claims over any future software profits, requested expanded financial disclosure. Stephanie Cole, Lauren's attorney, handled every meeting aggressively. She was famous in Denver family court for controlled intimidation. Sharp suits, sharp nails, sharper voice. During the second mediation session, Stephanie leaned forward across the table and said, "Mr. Perry appears to have spent years hiding marital assets inside undeclared technology projects. Robert Whitmore didn't even blink. No undeclared assets exist," he said calmly. "We have complete developmental records." Stephanie smiled thinly. "Your client spent substantial marital time building private commercial software." Tanner finally spoke. "I spent substantial marital time paying the mortgage too." Stephanie ignored him. Lauren sat quietly beside her legal team with an expression Tanner recognized immediately. Concern. Manufactured concern looked almost identical to compassion from a distance. That was why it worked. Outside the mediation room, Tanner noticed more small fractures spreading through his life. Jason Mercer stopped replying entirely. Emily Carter sent one message, wishing him the best through everything. Grant called once. Only once. "I don't want to get involved," Grant said carefully over the phone. Tanner stood inside the garage during the call, staring at lines of code moving across his monitor. "I didn't ask you to." Grant hesitated. "Lauren's worried about you, Tanner." The silence afterward lasted 3 full seconds. Then Tanner said quietly, "I know." Grant never called again. The court hearings became uglier by spring. Stephanie Cole attempted to characterize Tanner's garage work as obsessive behavior damaging the marriage. Lauren testified about emotional isolation, about Tanner withdrawing into technology. Tanner listened without expression, not because the words didn't hurt, because reacting emotionally inside family court often became evidence itself. So he stayed precise. When asked questions, he answered directly. When financial accusations appeared, he produced documentation. When Lauren implied he concealed software income, Robert introduced time-stamped tax records showing no commercial revenue existed during the marriage. Facts moved slower than emotion, but they moved heavier. One afternoon during a hearing inside Denver District Court, Stephanie attempted one final angle. "Mr. Perry," she asked smoothly, "would you agree your technology pursuits became more important to you than your relationships?" The courtroom stayed silent. Tanner looked briefly toward Lauren, then back toward Stephanie. "No," he said. Stephanie waited. Tanner continued, "I think some people confuse silence with absence." Even the judge looked up at that. Lauren's jaw tightened slightly for the first time all morning. The divorce finalized in late June. Lauren kept the Cherry Creek house. Most shared investment accounts were split, furniture divided, vehicles assigned. The friend group disappeared almost entirely overnight, but North Peak's core architecture remained legally Tanner's alone. Every line of code, every algorithm, every developmental right. Stephanie Cole looked irritated when the final ruling was read. Lauren looked stunned, not emotional, surprised, as if she had expected Tanner to fold eventually from pressure alone. Outside the courthouse, reporters from another hearing crowded the steps under bright summer sunlight. Lawyers moved in clusters. Traffic rolled heavily down Colfax Avenue. Lauren exited with Stephanie without speaking to Tanner. She wore dark sunglasses despite the clouds. Robert Whitmore stood beside Tanner, near the railing overlooking the street. "You did well," Robert said. Tanner adjusted the strap of his messenger bag. "It doesn't feel like winning," Robert nodded once. "Most real victories don't." Then the older attorney handed him a small envelope. Inside sat the original flash drive Tanner had brought during their first meeting. The black USB was scratched slightly near the edge now. Tanner turned it slowly between his fingers. Years of work, inside something small enough to lose in a pocket. Robert studied him carefully. "What are you going to do now?" Tanner looked down toward the city traffic below. Denver shimmered under summer heat. Glass towers, construction cranes, office buildings burning electricity by the second. Then he slipped the flash drive into his jacket pocket. "Finish it," he said. That night, Tanner returned alone to the Cherry Creek house for the final time. Lauren had already removed most of her belongings. The rooms echoed now. The garage remained nearly untouched. Monitors, whiteboards, server racks, extension cords running across concrete floors. Tanner stood in silence for several minutes. This room had cost him almost everything. Marriage, friends, reputation, years. But standing there now, he understood something Lauren never had. People only called obsession dangerous when it failed. At 11:18 p.m., Tanner loaded the final storage box into the back of the Ford. Then he shut the garage lights off and drove away with the code. The motel room smelled faintly like bleach and burnt coffee. Room 214 at Aspen Crest Extended Stay sat on the far end of the second floor, overlooking Interstate 25. Trucks rolled past all night. The ice machine near the stairwell rattled every 40 minutes. The yellow curtains never fully closed, leaving thin strips of highway light across the carpet until morning. Tanner Perry moved in with 2 duffel bags, 3 storage boxes, 4 monitors, and a folding table he bought from Walmart for $38. That was everything, at least everything that still mattered. The divorce had finalized 3 weeks earlier. Lauren kept the Cherry Creek house, most of the furniture, most of the shared social life too. Tanner kept the code. Some nights he wondered if that had been the more expensive half. The first evening inside room 214, he assembled his workstation in silence. Folding table against the wall. Monitors side by side. Backup drives beneath the television. White legal pads stacked near the microwave. At 11:07 p.m., he powered the system on. Blue light filled the room immediately. Outside, rain struck the motel railing. Inside, Tanner opened the North Peak architecture files and continued working exactly where he left off before the divorce hearings began. Not because he felt motivated, because stopping would have made the losses permanent. His daily routine became mechanical after that. Up at 5:10 a.m. coffee from the motel lobby, if the machine worked. Drive 23 minutes south to a commercial office complex near Centennial. Repair VAC systems. Inspect control panels. Replace damaged sensors. Answer service tickets nobody else wanted. Then drive back north after dark and work on North Peak until 2 or 3 in the morning. Repeat. Days blurred together. The motel residents changed constantly. Traveling nurses, divorced salesmen, construction workers, families waiting for apartment approvals. Nobody asked questions if you kept your head down. Tanner preferred it that way. The room itself looked increasingly less human over time. Cables spread across the floor like veins. Whiteboards leaned against walls covered in formulas and airflow diagrams. Half-empty coffee cups gathered near the monitors. Energy simulations ran overnight while Tanner slept 4 hours at a time beside the hum of cooling fans. Still progress accelerated. Without Lauren's criticism, without social obligations, without dinners pretending to impress people he no longer trusted. North Peak improved rapidly. Tanner rebuilt the prediction engine from scratch using occupancy behavior models instead of fixed schedules. The software adapted in real time now. It learned load fluctuations from weather shifts, elevator usage, even parking garage traffic patterns. The results became impossible to ignore. Simulation after simulation showed the same thing. 15% reduction, then 17, then 19. One Thursday night, around 1:30 a.m., Tanner leaned back in the motel chair, staring at the newest performance report glowing across monitor 3. Building efficiency increase 18.7%. He rubbed both hands across his face slowly. For the first time in months, he smiled, only slightly. Then his phone buzzed. An unknown number. Tanner almost ignored it. Instead, he answered quietly. "Hello." A woman's voice came through. "Hi, is this Tanner Perry?" "Yes." "This is Megan Walsh. I got your number from Carlton Mechanical." Tanner sat up straighter. Carlton Mechanical handled subcontracting for several office properties around Aurora. Tanner had done overnight emergency work for them twice that winter. Megan continued. "They said you built some kind of building optimization software." Tanner paused. "Why?" "I'm helping manage accounting for a small commercial property group," she said. "One of our buildings has energy costs that are, honestly, ridiculous." Tanner looked toward the simulation report still glowing on the screen. "What kind of building?" "Mixed-use office. 4 floors. Aurora Tech Center. Square footage about 90,000. Tanner reached for a pen automatically. Most people heard opportunity and became emotional. Tanner became precise. Megan answered questions quickly. Utility history, cooling schedules, peak hour costs, maintenance problems. By the end of the call, Tanner had 3 pages of notes. "We can pay for a consultation," Megan said carefully. "Not much, but enough to make it worth your time." Tanner stared at the rain sliding down the motel window. "It's worth my time," he said. The building sat near East Alameda Parkway. Old mechanical systems, poor airflow balancing, ancient software controls patched together by 3 different vendors over a decade. Tanner walked through the property alone the following Saturday morning with a flashlight and clipboard, while Megan followed beside him carrying invoices. She was 36, brown hair tied back loosely. No expensive jewelry, no rehearsed corporate smile. Unlike Lauren, Megan listened when Tanner spoke technically. Actually listened. "The cooling cycles are fighting each other," Tanner explained, while kneeling near an equipment cabinet. "This unit spikes load every 42 minutes because the occupancy schedule's wrong." Megan frowned. "Can that really affect costs that much?" Tanner pointed toward the control panel. "It already has." 3 weeks later, North Peak's first live test began. Not under the company name yet. At that stage, Tanner still operated under Perry Systems LLC because North Peak technically existed only inside notebooks and server files. The first 72 hours were rough. Sensor failures, bad data, a corrupted weather integration feed. Tanner slept inside room 214 for maybe 9 hours total that week. But on day 6, the system stabilized, and the numbers changed. Electric demand dropped gradually across all 4 floors. Cooling efficiency improved. Runtime waste declined during non-peak occupancy. By the end of the month, the property owners saw an 18.7% reduction in energy costs. The building manager thought the utility company made a mistake. Megan called Tanner immediately after the report finalized. "You need to look at this," she said. "I already did." "No, I mean, really look at it." Tanner opened the spreadsheet again. Savings estimate, $8,412 monthly. He stared silently. Not because the number shocked him, because the system had finally worked outside simulations. Real building, real load, real money. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Megan asked quietly, "Did you know it would work?" Tanner leaned back in the motel chair. "Yes." That answer stayed with Megan. Over the next few months, she became the first person, besides Tanner, who truly understood what North Peak could become. Not just software, infrastructure. The larger the building, the larger the savings. And commercial real estate in Denver was exploding. Downtown towers, medical complexes, distribution warehouses, hotels, every one of them bleeding energy through outdated automation systems. One evening, Megan visited room 214 to review accounting projections. She stopped inside the doorway. The motel room looked exhausted. Open notebooks everywhere, pizza boxes stacked near the trash can, Tanner asleep sideways on the bed in jeans and a thermal shirt, while simulation models rolled across the monitors. Megan stood there quietly for several seconds. Then she walked to the desk and saw something taped beside the screen. A printed sentence. "People only call obsession dangerous when it fails." Megan read it once, then looked back toward Tanner, sleeping under highway light filtering through the curtains. Most people who talked about changing industries sounded loud before they sounded credible. Tanner was the opposite. Quiet, methodical. Already building something before anyone believed it mattered. That was what convinced her, not confidence, consistency. 2 weeks later, Megan quit her bookkeeping position and joined Perry Systems part-time. Tanner tried talking her out of it. "You should keep stable work," he told her over coffee at a diner near Colfax. Megan stirred cream into her cup slowly. "You know what stable work usually means?" Tanner looked at her. "Slowly helping someone else get rich." He almost smiled. Almost. That same afternoon, Megan reviewed the LLC paperwork and frowned. Perry Systems sounds like a plumbing company. Tanner looked up from his laptop. "What's wrong with plumbing companies?" "Nothing," she said. "But this thing deserves a real name." 3 hours later, after pages of rejected ideas, Megan circled 2 words on a legal pad. North Peak Grid. Tanner stared at it quietly. Outside the diner window, snow drifted across East Colfax under orange streetlights. North Peak. Strong. Cold. Steady. It sounded like something that already existed. That night, Tanner officially registered the new company name online from room 214. North Peak Grid Systems, LLC. At 2:14 a.m., the confirmation email arrived. Tanner read it twice, then looked around the motel room. Cheap carpet, buzzing neon outside, half-broken heater, cables across the floor, no friends left, no marriage, no guarantees, only code. But for the first time since the divorce, the future no longer looked empty. It looked expensive. The first major opportunity arrived through a spreadsheet. Not a meeting, not a sales pitch, not networking. A spreadsheet. Megan Walsh emailed Tanner at 11:18 p.m. on a Thursday with the subject line, Summit Ridge Utility Reports. Tanner opened the file inside room 214 while eating cold takeout noodles from a white carton balanced beside his keyboard. The numbers immediately caught his attention. 3 office buildings owned by Summit Ridge Properties had experienced unexplained spikes in overnight energy demand across 6 consecutive quarters. Not random spikes, patterns. That mattered. Random failures usually meant hardware. Patterns meant systems. Tanner leaned closer to the monitor. Building occupancy dropped after 7 p.m. But cooling demand stayed abnormally high until nearly midnight. The software controlling airflow schedules was overcompensating every evening because it relied on static occupancy assumptions from pre-pandemic usage models. The buildings were cooling empty offices. For years. He opened another tab and started calculating potential losses. By 1:07 a.m., Tanner estimated Summit Ridge was wasting close to $300,000 annually across only those 3 properties. He stared at the figure in silence. Then he called Megan. She answered groggily. Do you know who oversees financial operations there? Temporarily. Megan yawned. Emily Carter. Tanner's hand stopped moving over the keyboard. For several seconds, neither spoke. Megan realized it immediately. Oh, Emily Carter. The same Emily who used to spend Sunday afternoons drinking wine with Lauren on their Cherry Creek patio. The same Emily who slowly stopped answering Tanner's emails after the divorce. The same Emily who once looked genuinely uncomfortable during that final steakhouse dinner downtown. Tanner leaned back slowly. I'm not interested if this turns into personal drama. Megan sat up on the other end of the call. It's not personal if the numbers are real. The numbers are real. Then let the numbers talk. Tanner looked again at the utility reports, glowing blue against the dark motel room. $300,000. That kind of waste got attention, even from people trying not to notice you. The meeting happened the following Tuesday at Summit Ridge's headquarters near downtown Denver. Tanner arrived 14 minutes early. Gray winter skies hung low over the city. Snow lined the curbs in dirty, frozen piles. Office workers hurried through revolving glass doors, carrying coffee cups and laptop bags. Tanner parked his old Ford F-150 in the visitor garage between 2 luxury SUVs worth more than his annual salary from HVAC work. He wore the only suit he still owned, navy, slightly outdated, pressed carefully the night before inside the motel bathroom. Megan met him in the lobby. You look nervous, she said quietly. I look cold. You're both. Probably true. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt longer than it was. Tanner kept reviewing numbers mentally while the digital floor count climbed upward. Not because he feared the meeting, because data calmed him. Conference Room B overlooked downtown Denver through floor-to-ceiling windows. Emily Carter stood near the far side of the room, speaking with two property managers when Tanner entered. She turned and froze slightly, only slightly. But Tanner noticed. Emily looked almost exactly the same as she had years earlier. Dark blazer, blonde hair pinned neatly back, calm posture, the kind of executive presence built through years of boardrooms and financial negotiations. But the warmth she once carried around Tanner had been replaced by caution, professional caution. "Tanner," she said carefully. "Emily." The property managers exchanged glances. Megan stepped forward quickly. "This is the energy optimization consultant I mentioned." Consultant, not founder, not owner, probably intentional. Emily motioned toward the conference table. "Let's see what you found." Tanner connected his laptop without small talk. The projector flickered alive. Utility charts filled the screen immediately. No flashy graphics, no polished branding, just numbers. Good numbers. Tanner began quietly. "Your overnight cooling demand is averaging 31% above projected occupancy load." One property manager frowned, meaning you're paying to cool mostly empty buildings. Emily crossed her arms. "And you know that," how Tanner enlarged several graphs. "Your current automation software uses fixed scheduling, but occupancy behavior changed after remote work adjustments. Your HVAC systems are compensating for outdated assumptions." The second property manager leaned forward slowly. Tanner continued. "Your buildings aren't malfunctioning. They're reacting exactly how they were programmed to react." Emily said nothing. That worried Tanner more than skepticism would have. She listened the way finance people listened before deciding whether something was dangerous or valuable, sometimes both. For nearly 40 minutes, Tanner walked them through system behavior models, airflow inefficiencies, predictive scheduling, logic, and live energy projections. No exaggeration, no sales language, just evidence. At one point, Emily interrupted him. "What exactly are you selling?" Tanner paused. "A management system." "You built this yourself?" "Yes." "When?" "Over several years." Emily studied him for a long moment after that. Not the software, him. Tanner recognized the expression immediately. Comparison. She was comparing the man in front of her with the version Lauren had spent years describing. The emotionally unstable husband, the isolated obsessive, the difficult man. But difficult men usually didn't arrive with perfectly organized audit models and 12 months of predictive simulations cross-referenced against utility records. Emily looked back toward the screen. "If this works," she said carefully. "What kind of savings are we talking about?" Tanner clicked once. A projection table appeared. Estimated annual reduction, $312,440. The room went silent. One of the property managers actually laughed once under his breath. "Jesus." Emily didn't laugh. She stared at the number for several seconds, then asked the most important question in the room. "How do we verify it?" Tanner almost respected her more for that than anything else she had said during the meeting. Most executives wanted promises. Emily wanted audit procedures. "You hire an independent review firm," Tanner said calmly. "I'll provide system access and baseline data." Emily nodded slowly. The meeting ended without dramatic reactions. No handshakes celebrating the future, no sudden excitement, just business cards and measured expressions. But Tanner noticed something small while disconnecting his laptop. Emily stayed behind after everyone else left. She stood near the windows overlooking downtown traffic while Megan organized paperwork. Finally, Emily spoke quietly. "You really built this?" Tanner slid the laptop into his bag. "Yes." "All of it, yes." Emily looked down briefly. "You should have told people." Tanner almost answered immediately, then stopped, because the truth was more complicated than that. He had tried, just not loudly enough for people who preferred confident performances over quiet work. Instead, he said, "It works either way." Emily gave a small nod. Not agreement. Recognition. 2 weeks later, Summit Ridge hired an independent energy audit firm out of Boulder. 3 engineers reviewed North Peak's live integration system. Tanner gave them full access, source logs, usage data, performance metrics, everything. Lauren once accused him of being obsessive about documentation. Now that obsession protected him. The audit process consumed 18 days. During that time, Tanner barely slept. Not because he doubted the software, because this was the first moment that could change everything. If the audit failed, North Peak remained a motel room experiment. If it succeeded, Tanner refused to finish the thought out loud. The call came at 8:42 p.m. while he sat cross-legged on the motel bed reviewing thermal response data. Megan burst through room 214's door without knocking. "You saw it yet?" Tanner stood immediately. "What happened?" Megan held up her phone. Her hands were shaking slightly. The audit finalized. Tanner took the phone. Independent verification results confirmed. Estimated annual savings, $318,771. System performance exceeded projection model by 2.1%. For several seconds, Tanner said nothing. Traffic hummed outside the motel window. The heater clicked softly beside the wall. Megan laughed first. "Oh my God." Tanner sat slowly on the edge of the bed, staring at the report. Real numbers now. Verified numbers. Not simulations. Not hope. Evidence. Then his phone buzzed again. Unknown incoming call. Denver area code. Tanner answered quietly. "Hello," Emily Carter's voice came through. Professional, controlled, but different now. "Tanner," she said, "I think we need to talk seriously about scaling this." He looked toward the glowing monitors around room 214. The cables, the notebooks, the folding table. Everything suddenly looked smaller than it had yesterday. Emily continued carefully. "And Tanner?" "Yes." A pause. "Not long. Just enough to matter. I owe you an apology." Tanner stared at the audit report in silence. Then he looked out the motel window toward the Denver skyline glowing faintly in the distance. For the first time in years, someone from the old circle had finally looked at the evidence before believing the story. And once that started happening, Tanner knew something important. The silence around him was beginning to crack. Grant Holloway first saw the North Peak audit report at 11:26 p.m. on a Sunday. He was alone in his condo overlooking Washington Park barefoot, halfway through a 12-year Macallan while reviewing acquisition documents for a healthcare merger in Phoenix. Emily Carter had forwarded the file with only one sentence attached. "You should read this carefully." Grant almost ignored it. His inbox received hundreds of documents weekly. Most disappeared unread into folders handled by associates the next morning. But Tanner Perry's name caught his attention immediately. He clicked. 10 minutes later, the whiskey sat untouched beside him. Grant leaned back slowly in his chair and reopened the report from the beginning. Independent energy verification, live building integrations, documented cost revisions, technical certifications. Every page looked clean, thorough, difficult to fake. That bothered him, not because he doubted the software, because he suddenly realized how little he actually knew about Tanner's life during the years everyone quietly abandoned him. Grant removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Then his attention landed on the timestamps. North Peak's earliest developmental architecture dated back years before the divorce, years before Lauren had started describing Tanner as unstable and isolated. Grant frowned slightly. Something about the timeline felt wrong now. Lawyers lived by timelines. Human memory lied constantly. Documents lied less. Grant opened another browser window and searched old email chains from years earlier. The first messages looked harmless. Lauren venting casually. Tanner's been impossible lately. I think he's shutting down emotionally. Sometimes I honestly worry about him. Small statements, soft statements, nothing dramatic enough to challenge directly. But reading them years later, grouped together in sequence, Grant noticed something unsettling. Every version of Tanner inside Lauren's stories lacked specifics. No actual incidents, no dates, no concrete events. Only impressions, feelings, concern. Grant leaned forward. Then he searched older messages from Tanner himself. There were barely any. A few replies about football games, holiday scheduling. One article about commercial HVAC systems. Tanner once sent to the group chat that nobody responded to. No attacks, no bitterness, no defensive rants after the divorce. Nothing. That silence suddenly looked different now. At 12:14 a.m., Grant reopened the audit report one final time. Estimated annual savings, $318,771. The software was real, which meant Tanner had been telling the truth the entire time. Grant stared out at the dark park below his condo windows. Somewhere during the divorce, he had stopped asking questions because Lauren's version of events sounded easier to believe socially. Quiet men created discomfort. Confident people created narratives. Most groups followed the louder voice. Grant included himself in that. That realization sat badly with him. The next morning, he called Emily. You met with him in person. And Emily stayed quiet briefly. Then she said carefully, he wasn't the person I expected. Grant hated that answer because he understood exactly what she meant. Neither of them wanted to admit how heavily Lauren's descriptions had shaped their assumptions. Grant stood near his office window overlooking downtown traffic. Do you think Lauren lied? Emily answered immediately. I think Lauren edited. That was worse somehow. Outright lies felt easier to reject morally. Selective truth sounded reasonable while still destroying people. Grant ended the call 20 minutes later, with a growing pressure behind his ribs he could not ignore. By noon, he had opened archived messages dating back nearly 4 years. Patterns emerged immediately. Lauren often contacted people individually before group events involving Tanner. Tiny warnings. Tanner's been in a mood lately. Don't bring up work around him. He's under a lot mentally right now. Grant stared at the messages in disbelief. At the time, the comments felt protective. Now they look strategic, carefully strategic. At 3:42 p.m., Grant searched one final thing: public business registration records. North Peak Grid Systems, LLC. Founder Tanner Perry. Registration date aligned perfectly with the post-divorce timeline. Grant leaned back heavily in his chair. Lauren once claimed Tanner spiraled after the divorce. But people spiraling rarely built enterprise-level infrastructure companies alone inside motel rooms. Grant checked the clock, then grabbed his coat. Union Station was crowded with commuters when Grant arrived. Business travelers rolled luggage across polished floors. Students crowded coffee tables near the windows. Snow drifted outside beyond the massive arched entrance. Tanner sat alone near the back of Terminal Bar with black coffee and an open laptop. Exactly on time. Grant stopped several feet away first. For a moment, neither man spoke. Tanner finally closed the laptop halfway. Grant. Grant nodded once. Tanner. The awkwardness between them felt physical. Not hostile. Worse. Earned. Grant sat down slowly across from him. "You look different," he said. Tanner glanced briefly toward the station windows. "So do you." That almost sounded like humor. Almost. A server approached. Grant ordered bourbon. Tanner stayed with coffee. For several seconds, only station noise filled the silence around them. Finally, Grant exhaled. "I owe you an apology." Tanner did not react immediately. Not cold, not forgiving, just listening. Grant continued carefully. "I should have talked to you directly during the divorce. You made your decision. I made assumptions." Tanner stirred the coffee once without drinking it. Grant noticed the changes in him immediately, now that he was actually looking. The exhaustion around the eyes, the calmness, the complete absence of performance. Lauren once described Tanner as emotionally volatile. Grant suddenly realized he had never personally witnessed Tanner lose control even once in 12 years. Not once. "You really built all of this yourself?" Grant asked quietly. "Yes." "In that motel room?" "Yes." Grant laughed once under his breath. Not mockingly, disbelievingly. "My God." Tanner looked up finally. "You didn't come here to compliment software." Grant nodded slowly. "No." He reached into his leather briefcase and removed several printed pages. Old email chains, highlighted sections, Lauren's messages. "I started reviewing things after Emily sent the audit report." Tanner glanced down at the papers. His expression did not change much. That disturbed Grant too. Most people would feel vindicated. Tanner looked unsurprised. "You documented everything, didn't you?" Grant asked. "Yes." "You expected this." Tanner leaned back slightly. "I expected memory to become unreliable." Grant stared at him. That sounded less like bitterness and more like engineering. A man designing for failure conditions before they happened. Grant lowered his voice. "She told us you were unstable." Tanner said nothing. "She implied you isolated yourself, that you became obsessive, difficult." Still nothing. Grant rubbed a hand across his jaw. "And honestly, I believed her because—" He stopped. "Because I was quiet." Tanner finished calmly. Grant looked down. "Because that was exactly it. Not entirely, but enough. Confident people receive the benefit of interpretation. Quiet people inherited suspicion, especially men." Grant drank from the bourbon when it arrived. "Tanner, why didn't you defend yourself more?" For the first time, Tanner smiled slightly. Not happily, just tired. Would it have mattered? Grant opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because he knew the answer, probably not. Not back then. Not once the social narrative hardened. Tanner reached into his messenger bag calmly. Grant expected contracts, audit reports. Instead, Tanner placed a small black external hard drive on the table between them. "What's this?" Grant asked. "Everything." Grant frowned. "Everything?" Emails, timelines, development records, court filings, notes. Grant stared at the drive. "You kept all this?" "Yes." Why? Tanner looked out toward the snowfall beyond Union Station's tall windows. "Because people trust confidence more than memory." The sentence settled heavily between them. Grant suddenly understood why Tanner's company was succeeding. Not only intelligence, discipline, the kind built quietly over years while other people underestimated him socially. Grant looked again at the hard drive, then back at Tanner. "What do you want from me?" Tanner answered immediately. "Nothing." That answer hit harder than anger would have. Grant realized Tanner genuinely expected nothing now from anyone who disappeared during the divorce. No revenge, no reconciliation demands, no emotional speech, just distance. And somehow that made the guilt worse. The station announcement system echoed overhead while trains arrived outside. Grant sat silently for several seconds. Then finally he said the one thing Tanner had probably deserved years earlier. "We failed you." Tanner looked at him quietly. Then he picked up the coffee cup. "No," he said calmly. "You believe the person talking." Grant watched him carefully after that. And for the first time since the divorce began, he understood something Lauren never had. Silence was not weakness. Sometimes silence was simply a man refusing to waste energy arguing while he built something larger than the room around him. As Grant left Union Station that afternoon, snow falling softly across downtown Denver, he realized something else too. If North Peak kept growing at this speed, people were going to revisit old stories very soon. And some of them were going to look extremely different the second time around. Jason Mercer came back through a loading dock. Not the front entrance, not a boardroom, not a charity dinner with bourbon and fake apologies. A loading dock. The warehouse sat in Commerce City, just northeast of Denver, surrounded by rail lines, diesel smoke, and rows of refrigerated trailers humming beneath gray winter skies. Mercer Logistics had recently acquired the facility after a rushed expansion into pharmaceutical cold storage. The problem was simple. The electrical systems were failing. Not catastrophically, worse, intermittently. Random temperature spikes inside pharmaceutical storage could destroy millions of dollars in product before alarms triggered. 3 incidents had already happened in 6 months. Jason Mercer was losing patience and money. At 4:12 a.m. on a Wednesday, the warehouse nearly lost another shipment. The overnight operations manager noticed cooling zones, fluctuating between safe thresholds every 37 minutes. Technicians checked compressors. Electricians checked backup systems. Nothing explained the pattern. Then one junior facilities analyst noticed something strange. A small software panel labeled North Peak Grid Systems Monitoring Layer Active. The analyst clicked it. Within seconds, the dashboard isolated the problem. An automated load balancing conflict between 2 aging refrigeration units was creating synchronized power surges across adjacent cooling sectors. The system predicted full failure in 92 minutes. Maintenance crews shut the sequence down just in time. The warehouse avoided an estimated $4.8 million product loss before sunrise. Jason received the report while stepping into his black Escalade outside his Cherry Hills home. At first, he barely paid attention. Then he saw the name, North Peak Grid Systems. Jason frowned immediately. He opened the attached audit summary while traffic moved slowly along I-70 toward downtown. By the time he reached his office, he had read the report twice. At 10:40 a.m., Jason called the warehouse director. "Who installed this system?" "Some company out of Denver," the director answered. "North Peak." "Who's behind it?" Pause. Then Tanner Perry. Jason gripped the phone tighter. For several seconds, he said nothing. Because suddenly, the timeline in his head rearranged itself. Lauren's stories. Tanner disappearing socially. The divorce. Then silence. Meanwhile, Tanner had apparently been building industrial infrastructure software powerful enough to protect national pharmaceutical logistics networks. Jason sat slowly behind his office desk. He remembered the steakhouse dinner years earlier. Lauren laughing lightly. He's always in the garage working on weird energy spreadsheets. Jason remembered laughing too. Now he understood something uncomfortable. Tanner had been the only person at that table actually building something real. At noon, Jason canceled 2 investor calls. At 1:15 p.m., he drove personally to the Commerce City warehouse. Snow clouds rolled low across the industrial district. Forklifts moved between loading bays while diesel engines rattled against concrete walls. Inside the operations office, a facility engineer pointed toward a side monitor displaying live North Peak analytics. Jason studied the screen carefully. Power distribution forecasting, thermal drift prediction, load balancing adjustments in real time. The software looked clean, efficient, built by someone who understood systems from the inside instead of from conference rooms. "Can we contact the vendor?" Jason asked. The engineer nodded. "Already sent a service ticket. Their lead engineer's on site today." Jason expected a technician in a branded polo shirt. Instead, 15 minutes later, Tanner Perry walked in through the loading dock wearing work boots and a dark winter jacket dusted lightly with snow. Jason actually stood up instinctively. Tanner stopped too. Neither man spoke for a second. The warehouse noise filled the silence around them. Forklift alarms, truck engines, metal doors slamming shut. Jason stared at Tanner carefully. He looked leaner than before the divorce. More tired too. But steadier somehow. Like pressure had burned unnecessary parts away instead of destroying him. Tanner glanced once toward the monitor. Cooling sectors stabilized. The engineer nodded quickly. Since 6 this morning, Tanner stepped toward the control panel immediately. No performance, no social awkwardness, no attempt to impress Jason, just work. Jason watched him review system logs with calm concentration. Halfway through diagnostics, Tanner finally looked over. "Jason." His voice stayed neutral. Not cold, not warm, just factual. Jason swallowed once. "Didn't expect to see you here." Tanner returned his attention to the monitor. "I'm on site 3 days a week." The answer landed harder than Jason expected. 3 days a week, meaning Tanner built this company personally from the ground level upward. No PR team, no inflated startup branding, no fake executive image, actual infrastructure work. Jason shoved both hands into his coat pockets. "You saved us a fortune last night." Tanner typed something into the terminal. The system did. Jason almost laughed. Same Tanner, still redirecting credit away from himself automatically. The engineer left briefly to answer another call, leaving the two men alone near the loading dock office. Snow blew sideways outside through partially open bay doors. Jason looked at Tanner carefully. I owe you an apology. Tanner continued reviewing thermal logs. For what specifically, Jason blinked once. The question wasn't aggressive, just precise. That somehow made it worse. Jason exhaled slowly, for disappearing. Tanner nodded once without looking up. You weren't the only one. That's not an excuse. No. Silence returned briefly. Jason studied him. Years earlier, Lauren described Tanner as emotionally difficult and unstable. But standing here now, inside a freezing warehouse at the center of a multi-million-dollar logistics operation, Jason realized something obvious. Unstable men didn't build systems trusted with pharmaceutical storage infrastructure. They especially didn't build them quietly. Jason rubbed a hand across his jaw. She told us things. Tanner's expression barely changed. I know. You never defended yourself. That finally made Tanner pause. He looked toward the open loading dock where snow drifted across concrete outside. Then he answered calmly. People usually decide who they believe before the conversation starts. Jason had no response to that, because it was true, especially socially, especially in groups. The warehouse engineer returned carrying updated diagnostic reports. Tanner reviewed them quickly. Then he turned toward Jason. You still running Arizona routes? Jason nodded automatically. Yeah. How many cold storage facilities now? 11. Tanner considered that silently for a second. Then he pointed toward the monitor. Your systems are vulnerable in at least 6 of them. Jason frowned immediately. You know that how? Same refrigeration architecture, same vendor generation, same load balancing patterns. Jason stared. Tanner stepped closer to the dashboard and enlarged several thermal charts. Your facilities compensate manually during peak strain windows. It works temporarily, but eventually the systems start cycling against each other. Jason looked down at the data. Everything Tanner said aligned perfectly with operational problems his managers had been fighting for months. How long until failure? Jason asked quietly. Tanner studied the chart. Depends on usage. Then he pointed at one sector. But this location in Phoenix, he tapped again. 3 to 5 months. Jason felt a slow chill move through him unrelated to the warehouse temperature. Not because Tanner sounded dramatic, because he sounded certain. That certainty came from competence, not ego. And Jason suddenly understood why Emily called him earlier that week, sounding almost shaken after seeing North Peak's audits. Tanner wasn't surviving after the divorce. He was scaling fast. Jason looked again around the warehouse office. North Peak Terminals. North Peak Diagnostics. North Peak alerts integrated directly into logistics operations. Somewhere during the years, everyone stopped calling Tanner Perry. He had quietly become dangerous in the most underestimated way possible. Useful. Extremely useful. By late afternoon, Tanner finished system adjustments and prepared to leave. Jason followed him through the warehouse toward the loading dock exit. Snow crunched under their boots outside. Tanner carried a worn laptop bag over one shoulder. Same calm posture, same quietness. But Jason noticed something now he had missed before. Confidence. Not loud confidence. Structural confidence. The kind built from knowing exactly what you can do. Jason stopped beside Tanner's old Ford, parked near the loading area. "You should come by the office sometime," he said carefully. Tanner unlocked the truck. "For what?" Jason smiled faintly. "Because I think North Peak should be running every warehouse I own." Tanner studied him for a moment. Not emotionally, evaluating. Then he nodded once. "We can review the facilities. Business. Clean, simple." Jason almost respected that more than forgiveness. As Tanner climbed into the truck, Jason suddenly spoke again. "Tanner." He looked up. Jason hesitated, then finally said the thing that had bothered him all day. "We should have known better." Tanner rested one hand on the steering wheel. Snow drifted softly between them. Then he answered, quietly. "You believed the loudest version." The engine started. Moments later, the old Ford pulled away from the warehouse and disappeared into the falling snow. Jason stood there, watching, until the truck vanished beyond the industrial rail lines. Then he looked back toward the warehouse glowing behind him. North Peak software was already running inside every refrigeration sector. And for the first time, Jason understood something Lauren never saw coming. The man she isolated socially had quietly positioned himself inside industries too important to ignore. North Peak stopped feeling temporary sometime during the second winter. Not because Tanner Perry celebrated anything. He didn't. The moment arrived quietly one Tuesday morning when he unlocked the door to a newly leased office suite near Lodo and realized there were too many people inside for him to know what everyone was working on anymore. That changed him more than the revenue reports did. For nearly 3 years, North Peak had existed inside motel rooms, server closets, borrowed workspaces, and Tanner's own exhaustion. Now, there were actual departments, actual payroll systems, actual conference calls with clients in different states. The office occupied the 4th floor of a renovated warehouse building near Wynkoop Street. Exposed brick walls, concrete floors, industrial windows overlooking downtown Denver rail lines. Megan Walsh had negotiated the lease personally after arguing Tanner out of another year at Aspen Crest Extended Stay. "You can't run a national infrastructure company from a motel room forever," she told him. Tanner answered without looking up from his laptop. "Why not?" "Because investors start wondering if you're being hunted." That almost made him laugh. Almost. The office still looked unfinished compared to most tech companies. No neon logos, no expensive furniture, no kombucha taps or motivational slogans painted across walls. Just long desks, engineering monitors, whiteboards filled with system maps and people working. Actual working. Tanner preferred it that way. By then, North Peak Grid Systems had expanded into 6 states: Colorado, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas. Commercial towers used the software. Distribution warehouses depended on it. Hospital networks had begun testing North Peak's predictive load balancing infrastructure after several severe summer outages across Denver. Revenue climbed faster every quarter, but Tanner's habits barely changed. He still arrived before sunrise, still drove the old Ford F-150, still ate breakfast at the same diner near Blake Street, where the waitress no longer asked if he wanted coffee because she already poured it when he walked through the door. The only visible difference was the phone. It rang constantly now. Investors, property groups, vendors, legal teams, energy consultants, people who ignored him for years suddenly wanted meetings. Tanner noticed the pattern. He just didn't comment on it. One snowy morning, Megan entered his office carrying 3 folders and stopped short. Tanner sat at the desk in the same faded Navy maintenance jacket he wore during his HVAC years. "You know you technically own the company now, right?" she asked. Tanner looked up from server diagnostics. "Yes. You're allowed to dress like it. This jacket still works." Megan dropped the folders on his desk. "That's not the point." But secretly, Tanner understood the jacket mattered. It reminded him where North Peak actually started. Not in venture capital meetings, not in luxury offices. Room 214. Cold coffee, 4 hours of sleep, and silence. A lot of silence. The first major leadership meeting happened in February. Megan insisted they needed formal governance before expansion accelerated further, which means, she explained while pacing the conference room, you need a real board. Tanner leaned back in his chair. We have accountants. That's not a board. We have lawyers. That's also not a board. Tanner rubbed his eyes slowly. What exactly are you proposing? Megan slid a folder across the table. 3 names sat inside. Emily Carter, Grant Holloway, Jason Mercer. Tanner stared at the list quietly. Outside the conference room, windows snow drifted over downtown Denver rooftops. You're serious, he said. Yes. They disappeared, and they came back. That's not the same thing. Megan crossed her arms. No, it isn't. Silence settled briefly. Tanner looked again at the names. Emily brought financial credibility and commercial property relationships. Grant specialized in corporate structure and acquisitions. Jason controlled logistics networks across multiple states. Strategically, Megan was right. Personally, that part felt more complicated. Not emotional exactly, just unfinished. 3 days later, Emily Carter visited North Peak headquarters for the first time. She walked slowly through the engineering floor, studying wall-sized infrastructure maps and live system dashboards glowing across monitors. This is much bigger than I expected, she admitted quietly. Tanner stood beside her. It grew quickly. Emily gave him a look. No, she said carefully. It grew quietly. That sentence stayed with him, because it was true. North Peak expanded the same way Tanner rebuilt himself after the divorce. Without announcements, without performance, without asking permission. Inside the conference room, Megan reviewed expansion forecasts, while Emily listened closely. Projected national scaling, infrastructure licensing, energy partnerships, possible acquisition interest within 2 years. Emily finally leaned back. You need institutional structure. Immediately, she said. Megan pointed toward Tanner. Tell him that. Emily looked at Tanner directly now. Companies fail at this stage because founders think surviving alone means they should continue alone. Tanner folded his arms. I survived fine. Emily's expression softened slightly. That's not what I meant. For a second, the room grew quiet. Then Emily added carefully, you shouldn't have had to. Tanner looked away first. 2 weeks later, Grant Holloway arrived. Unlike Emily, Grant immediately understood what North Peak represented financially. He reviewed contracts for 90 minutes in complete silence before finally removing his glasses. Tanner, he said slowly, do you understand what this company could be worth in 5 years? Tanner shrugged slightly, enough to keep the servers running. Grant laughed once under his breath, then stopped laughing when he realized Tanner was serious. What you built isn't a software product anymore, Grant said. It's infrastructure dependency. That mattered. Infrastructure dependency meant clients couldn't easily leave once integrated deeply enough into operations. Grant looked around the conference room carefully. You realize larger firms are going to come after this. They already are. You need protection. I have Robert Whitmore. Grant almost smiled. You need more than one old attorney with terrifying eye contact. That afternoon, Grant agreed to become North Peak's outside legal advisor. Not officially board level yet, but close. Jason Mercer joined last, and predictably, he arrived through the loading dock instead of the front lobby. Tanner found him downstairs inspecting backup generator systems with two operations managers. Jason pointed upward toward the server floors. You really built all this after living in a motel, yeah? Jason shook his head slowly. That's insane. Probably. But Jason understood something the others didn't. Scale. He had watched North Peak stabilize warehouse networks across multiple states already. Logistics failures decreased. Refrigeration losses dropped. Insurance costs improved. Jason saw operational value immediately. During a strategy session later that week, he leaned forward across the table and said, "You're thinking too small." Tanner frowned slightly. "We're in 6 states. You should be thinking nationally." Megan looked interested immediately. Grant nodded too. Emily studied revenue forecasts silently. Jason tapped the table once. Every major logistics network in the country has the same infrastructure weakness. Your software fixes it. Tanner stared down at the reports. Not because he disagreed, because growth meant visibility. Visibility meant attention. And attention eventually reached old places. That prediction arrived faster than expected. 3 months later, Denver Business Monthly published a feature article, "The Quiet Engineer Behind North Peak Grid Systems." The article included photos of Tanner standing awkwardly beside server infrastructure inside North Peak headquarters. He hated every picture. Megan framed the magazine anyway. By Friday afternoon, LinkedIn exploded with reposts from investors and commercial real estate executives. By Saturday morning, Lauren Whitaker Perry saw the article. She was having brunch at a rooftop restaurant in Cherry Creek when Natalie Brooks sent the link. At first, Lauren assumed it was some minor consulting business. Then she saw the valuation estimates, projected acquisition potential, multi-state expansion, board advisory discussions, and the names. Emily Carter, Grant Holloway, Jason Mercer. Lauren reread that section twice. Her coffee cooled untouched beside the table. Because the 3 people she once convinced to distance themselves from Tanner Perry were now publicly connected to his company. Not casually, structurally, professionally, that changed everything. Lauren opened Tanner's company website immediately. Corporate offices, press releases, infrastructure partnerships, national clients. The man she once described socially as unstable and obsessive now looked dangerously legitimate. Lauren stared at the screen for a very long time. Then she did something she had not done in nearly 4 years. She emailed Tanner directly. The subject line was simple: "We should catch up." Tanner received the message at 11:48 p.m. while reviewing server deployment reports inside the North Peak office. He stared at the sender name silently. Lauren Whitaker Perry. Outside the office windows, downtown Denver glowed beneath falling snow. Megan looked up from across the room. "What is it?" Tanner turned the monitor slightly toward her. Megan read the subject line once, then laughed softly in disbelief. Well, she said that didn't take long. Tanner said nothing. He simply looked at the email another few seconds before closing the laptop slowly. Because somewhere beneath the silence of the past 4 years, he had always known this moment would eventually come. Success had a way of making old stories unstable. And Lauren had just realized the version she created about Tanner Perry was beginning to collapse under the weight of reality. The reception at the Brown Palace was supposed to be private, not secret, just controlled. Stonevale Capital preferred it that way. The investment firm specialized in infrastructure acquisitions across energy and logistics markets, and by the time North Peak entered serious negotiations with them, the projected valuation had climbed past $84 million. Even Tanner thought the number sounded unreal. Not fake, just distant from the life he still mentally carried around. Room 214. Frozen motel parking lots. Microwave noodles at 2 a.m. Those memories didn't disappear simply because investors started using words like strategic expansion and national scalability. The reception occupied the grand ballroom on the second floor of the Brown Palace Hotel in downtown Denver. Crystal chandeliers glowed against dark wood walls, while servers carried champagne across carpets, older than most companies in the room. Executives moved carefully through clusters of conversation. Commercial real estate, infrastructure finance, private equity, the kind of people who never raised their voices because money already listened when they spoke normally. Tanner hated events like this, not out of insecurity, out of exhaustion. Every conversation felt layered. Nobody simply asked questions. They positioned themselves socially through them. Megan adjusted Tanner's tie near the ballroom entrance. You look like you're being escorted to trial. I preferred the server rooms. You can't negotiate an $84 million acquisition in a boiler room. Tanner looked toward the ballroom. Maybe I should try. Megan smiled faintly, but even she looked tense tonight. Because Stonevale mattered. The acquisition wouldn't remove Tanner from North Peak entirely. The proposed structure allowed him to retain operational control while Stonevale handled national scaling infrastructure. Still deals at this level changed everything. Employees, ownership structures, public visibility. Grant Holloway stood near the bar speaking with Stonevale's lead counsel. Emily Carter reviewed printed financial summaries beside 2 analysts. Jason Mercer laughed loudly with logistics executives near the center of the room. 3 former friends, now functioning like pillars underneath Tanner's company. That irony never fully stopped feeling strange. A Stonevale partner named Richard Ellison approached carrying bourbon. Tanner, he said smoothly, everyone here wants 5 minutes with you. That sounds inefficient? Richard laughed immediately. Good sign. People with money liked finding quiet founders amusing. It made them feel socially dominant. Tanner understood that dynamic now. He simply no longer cared much about it. The reception progressed smoothly for the first hour. Investors asked technical questions. Tanner answered directly. No exaggeration, no startup theater. The more restrained he remained, the more seriously Stonevale seemed to take him. That part always confused people. Most founders tried sounding larger than reality. Tanner described reality carefully enough that people eventually realized it was already large. At 8:17 p.m., the ballroom atmosphere shifted. Not loudly, subtly. Conversation slowed near the entrance. Several heads turned. Megan noticed first. Her expression hardened instantly. Tanner. He followed her line of sight. Lauren Whitaker Perry stood beneath the chandelier near the ballroom doors wearing a black evening dress and silver earrings Tanner recognized from years earlier. For a brief second, the room felt strangely compressed around him. Not emotional, structural. Like an old fault line quietly reopening beneath concrete. Lauren looked exactly the way Tanner remembered her during high-end corporate events. Perfect posture, controlled smile, the ability to appear naturally welcome anywhere within 10 seconds of entering a room. That had always been her talent. Not lying exactly, belonging. She spotted Tanner almost immediately, then began walking toward him with calm confidence. Megan muttered under her breath. Who invited her? Grant overheard and turned sharply. His expression darkened the moment he saw Lauren approaching. Jason stopped speaking mid-conversation. Emily looked genuinely alarmed. That alone told Tanner something important. None of them expected this either. Lauren reached them carrying a champagne glass lightly between manicured fingers. Tanner, she said warmly, you look good. Tanner held her gaze evenly. Lauren, no hug, no handshake, just recognition. Lauren smiled toward the others naturally. Emily, Grant, Jason, she laughed softly. This feels surreal. Nobody answered immediately. That silence finally cracked Lauren's composure by maybe half a degree. Only someone watching closely would notice. Tanner noticed. Of course he did. Richard Ellison approached from behind holding another drink. Everything all right here? Lauren turned smoothly before anyone else spoke. Oh, absolutely, she said. I'm Lauren, Tanner's ex-wife. Richard blinked once, then smiled politely. Richard Ellison, Stonevale Capital. Lauren extended her hand immediately. I've heard wonderful things about the deal. Grant stepped closer before Richard could continue. This is a private reception. Lauren looked surprised. I know. I was invited. Grant frowned instantly. By who? Tanner already knew the answer. Some mid-level networking contact. Someone impressed by Lauren's PR background who had no understanding of the history attached to her name. Lauren turned back toward Richard smoothly. Tanner and I spent years talking about systems like this, she said lightly. It's incredible seeing how far he's taken everything. Megan's jaw tightened visibly. Tanner remained still. Because the sentence itself wasn't technically false. That made it dangerous. Lauren specialized in implication more than fabrication. Richard glanced toward Tanner. You two stayed close after the divorce, Lauren answered before Tanner could. We had difficult years, she said softly. But I always believed he was brilliant. Emily looked down immediately after hearing that, because all of them remembered differently. Lauren continued effortlessly. Honestly, seeing this tonight feels emotional. Jason stared at his bourbon glass. Grant's expression became unreadable. Tanner understood what was happening in real time now. Lauren wasn't trying to reconnect personally. She was repositioning herself historically. If North Peak became nationally valuable, she intended to attach herself to its origin story. That was the real reason she came. Not love, not regret, proximity. The conversations around them slowly resumed, but differently now. Investors glanced over more often. Curiosity spread naturally through the ballroom. Lauren belonged socially in rooms like this. That made her dangerous again. Richard smiled politely at her. You must be proud. Lauren lowered her eyes slightly. It wasn't always easy, she said. There it was. Another carefully shaped implication. Not direct, never direct. Just enough emotional framing to create a narrative vacuum people filled themselves. Tanner watched her calmly. Years earlier, statements like that would have unsettled him emotionally. Now, they simply looked familiar. Predictable systems behaved predictably. Lauren's behavior followed patterns too. Grant finally stepped in firmly. "Richard," he said, "we need you for the legal review discussion." Richard nodded. "Of course." As the Stonevale executive walked away, Lauren turned toward Tanner again. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lauren smiled slightly. "You built quite a company," Tanner answered calmly. "Yes, I mean it. I know." That response seemed to unsettle her slightly, because Tanner no longer sounded defensive around her. No need to defend things already proven. Lauren took a sip of champagne. "You could have answered my email. You weren't asking about me." That landed. A flicker across her face. Quick. Gone immediately. "You think that's fair?" she asked softly. "I think it's accurate." Across the ballroom, Emily watched the exchange carefully while pretending to review documents with analysts. Jason looked openly uncomfortable now. Grant looked angry. Not at Tanner. At himself. Lauren noticed all of it too. The shifting loyalties. The changed gravity in the room. For years, she controlled the social version of Tanner Perry because nobody had evidence powerful enough to challenge her interpretation. Now, Tanner possessed something stronger than social approval. Institutional credibility. That changed how people processed every old memory attached to him. Lauren stepped closer slightly. "You know," she said quietly, "I always knew you'd do something significant." Tanner almost smiled. Not because he believed her, because the sentence perfectly captured who Lauren truly was. She adapted to visible power quickly, always had. Before Tanner could answer, Megan approached holding a folder. "Stonevale's ready for the executive review." Lauren stepped back gracefully. "Of course," she said. "I won't interrupt business." But as Tanner turned to leave, Lauren spoke once more. Soft enough only he could hear. "Be careful who you trust in rooms like this." Tanner paused, then looked at her calmly. "I learned that from you." For the first time all evening, Lauren lost control of her expression completely. Only for a second, but long enough. Tanner walked away toward the executive conference suite without looking back. Inside the ballroom behind him, conversations resumed beneath crystal chandeliers and soft jazz music. But something fundamental had shifted now. Lauren Whitaker Perry had entered the room expecting proximity to power. Instead, she had just discovered the quiet man she once isolated socially no longer needed permission from anyone inside it. And that realization was beginning to frighten her. Lauren's second mistake happened 3 days after the Brown Palace reception. The first mistake was showing up. The second was assuming the old strategy still worked. It began with a phone call placed from a private dining room inside a steakhouse in Cherry Creek. Stonevale capital partner Richard Ellison sat across from Lauren Whitaker Perry while a half-finished glass of Cabernet rested near her hand. Lauren looked calm, concerned, carefully concerned. That tone again. The same one Tanner remembered from years earlier. Richard listened politely while Lauren spoke in measured sentences. "I'm not trying to interfere," she said softly. "I just think there are things investors should know before finalizing anything." Richard folded his hands. "Like what exactly?" Lauren hesitated. Not because she lacked preparation, because pauses made people lean in. Tanner can become extremely consumed by work. Richard's expression barely moved. Lauren continued carefully. He isolates himself. He hides stress well. But during our marriage, there were periods where I genuinely worried about his stability. Again, not direct accusations, implications, social poison delivered in controlled doses. Richard asked the obvious question. Was there ever violence? Lauren looked down immediately. No, she said quietly. Nothing like that. But she left silence afterward intentionally. The oldest trick in the room. Let imagination finish the sentence. Richard noticed it. So did the Stonevale associate sitting beside him taking notes. Lauren shifted slightly. I just think people should understand who they're partnering with. The conversation lasted 27 minutes. By the next morning, Stonevale's legal department requested an internal executive risk review before signing final acquisition terms. At 8:14 a.m., Grant Holloway received the notification. At 8:19, he called Tanner. You need to come in. Tanner stood inside North Peak's server room, replacing a damaged cooling sensor when the call arrived. Problem? Yes. Technical worse. Tanner closed the maintenance panel slowly. Lauren Grant paused. How did you know? Because predictable systems repeated themselves. Tanner arrived at North Peak headquarters 43 minutes later, carrying black coffee and a worn messenger bag. The conference room atmosphere felt different immediately. Megan stood near the whiteboard with crossed arms. Emily reviewed legal notes silently. Jason paced beside the windows overlooking downtown Denver traffic. Nobody looked panicked. That mattered. Panicked rooms made mistakes. Grant slid a folder across the table. Stonevale initiated an executive behavioral review. Tanner opened the file calmly. Inside sat summarized notes from Richard Ellison's dinner conversation with Lauren. Concerns regarding emotional stability, past isolation behaviors, potential executive unpredictability during stress conditions. Jason swore under his breath. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Megan looked ready to drive directly to Lauren's house personally. Tanner kept reading silently. No emotional reaction, just analysis. Finally, he set the papers down. She's escalating because the acquisition became public enough to matter. Grant nodded once. That's our assessment, too. Jason stopped pacing. Can we sue her already? Grant answered immediately. Not yet. Megan looked at Tanner. You okay? He took a sip of coffee before answering. Yes. That unsettled everyone slightly. Not because Tanner sounded cold, because he sounded unsurprised. Emily studied him carefully. You expected this possibility? Yes. Grant leaned back slowly. How Tanner opened the messenger bag, then removed a black external hard drive and placed it quietly on the conference table. The room went still. Jason stared at it. What's on there? Everything. Grant exhaled softly. Of course. Emily shook her head slightly in disbelief. You really documented all of it. Tanner looked at her calmly. Lauren's strongest skill was narrative control. He tapped the drive lightly. So I kept records. Megan almost smiled despite the tension, because this was the difference between Tanner and everyone else in the room. Most people defended themselves emotionally. Tanner prepared structurally. Grant connected the drive to the conference room monitor. Folders appeared immediately. Emails, timeline records, legal filings, voice memos, text screenshots, development logs, journal entries with timestamps. The organization itself looked almost forensic. Jason stared at the screen. My God. Grant opened a folder labeled Social Isolation Timeline. Inside sat years of notes, canceled invitations, messages from former friends, emails Lauren sent privately before group events. Patterns, not theories, patterns. Emily covered her mouth briefly while reading one message aloud. He's under a lot mentally right now. Please don't corner him tonight. The email came from Lauren to Emily 3 hours before the steakhouse dinner years earlier. Emily looked physically uncomfortable now. I thought she was protecting him. Tanner said nothing, because saying I know would help nobody. Grant opened another folder. Development Verification Archive. Thousands of time-stamped files appeared. Version histories, cloud backups, commercial registrations, everything proving North Peak's creation timeline independently from Lauren. Jason sat down heavily. She really thought she could challenge ownership. After all this, Tanner answered quietly. She thought social credibility mattered more than records. Grant looked up immediately. That's exactly what this is still about. He was right. Lauren wasn't attacking North Peak technically. She was attacking Tanner's credibility personally. Because personal doubt spreads faster than legal evidence during acquisitions. Stonevale needed certainty. Lauren aimed to introduce uncertainty. Megan folded her arms tighter. So what's the move? Grant closed the laptop halfway. We respond professionally. No emotional retaliation. Jason snorted. You're no fun. I'm expensive fun, Grant corrected. That finally earned the smallest hint of laughter in the room. Brief, necessary. Then Emily looked toward Tanner carefully. Do you want us handling this? Tanner considered the question seriously. Not because he doubted them, because trust still felt expensive after the divorce years. Finally, he nodded once. Yes. That single word shifted the room subtly. The old circle had once abandoned Tanner socially. Now they were asking permission to defend him professionally. Grant immediately divided responsibilities. Legal review, financial verification, independent behavioral references, operational credibility reports. Megan prepared infrastructure documentation proving Tanner's executive stability through North Peak's scaling history. Emily organized financial audits demonstrating disciplined leadership patterns over 4 years. Jason gathered testimony from logistics executives across multiple states who trusted Tanner with multi-million-dollar operational systems. Evidence, not emotion. Exactly Tanner's language. Late that evening, after most employees left, Tanner remained alone inside the conference room, reviewing old files. The city glowed outside the windows beneath falling snow. Traffic lights reflected across wet Denver streets far below. Grant returned carrying 2 coffees. You should go home eventually. Tanner looked at the screen. I am home eventually. Grant handed him a cup. For several seconds, both men studied the folders quietly. Then Grant spoke carefully. You know what bothers me most? Tanner waited. You never exaggerated once. Grant sat across from him now. All those years, Lauren told stories with emotional weight. And you, he gestured toward the drive, you kept records. Tanner stared at the folder silently. My father used to say something he said quietly. People remember feelings longer than details. Grant nodded slowly. That's true. So if details matter later, you'd better save them. The sentence settled heavily between them, because that was exactly what had happened. Lauren won socially for years because emotions arrive faster than documentation. But acquisitions worth $84 million did not operate emotionally. They operated through verification. Grant leaned back. Stonevale's going to ask difficult questions tomorrow. That's fine. You're not angry? Tanner looked out toward downtown Denver, the same city where he once sat alone in a motel room while everyone quietly stopped calling. I was angry 4 years ago, he said calmly. Grant said nothing, because that answer revealed something painful. Lauren's current attack wasn't reopening old wounds. It was arriving too late. Tanner had already survived the part designed to destroy him. The next morning, Stonevale's executive review panel arrived at North Peak headquarters at 9 o'clock sharp. 3 attorneys, 2 behavioral consultants, 1 acquisitions director. Professional, polite, dangerous. They entered conference room 1 carrying tablets and legal folders while North Peak's leadership team waited. Tanner sat at the center of the table wearing the same faded navy jacket Megan still hated. Grant placed the black external hard drive beside him quietly. The lead consultant opened her notebook. Mr. Perry, she began carefully, we'd like to discuss concerns recently raised regarding executive stability and personal conduct. Tanner folded his hands calmly. Then he slid the hard drive forward across the table. Good, he said, because I brought records. The executive review lasted 6 hours. Not because Tanner Perry argued emotionally, because the evidence kept expanding. Conference room 1 at North Peak headquarters looked less like a business meeting by noon and more like a forensic investigation. Stonevale's legal team sat along one side of the table with open laptops and printed binders. Behavioral consultants reviewed notes quietly, while acquisition analysts cross-checked financial timelines against developmental records. Across from them sat Tanner Grant Holloway, Emily Carter, Jason Mercer, and Megan Walsh. No one raised their voice. That mattered. The most dangerous rooms were usually the quietest. The lead Stonevale consultant introduced herself as Dr. Helen Morris, a corporate behavioral risk specialist based out of Chicago. Gray suit, sharp eyes, careful tone. The kind of person trained to detect instability beneath polished executive behavior. She studied Tanner closely from the start. Mr. Perry, she began, our responsibility is determining whether personal conduct concerns present acquisition risk. Tanner nodded once. I understand. Dr. Morris folded her hands. Your former spouse described periods of emotional isolation, obsessive behavior, and impaired interpersonal functioning. Jason visibly shifted in irritation. Grant remained perfectly still. Tanner opened the hard drive folders calmly, then projected the first timeline onto the screen. No speeches, just records. Years of them. Source code timestamps appeared first. Development logs stretching back nearly 7 years. Daily entries, archived backups, cloud synchronization records, server invoices. Every line mapped precisely against Tanner's employment history and legal filings. A Stonevale analyst frowned while reviewing the metadata. These records are authenticated, Grant answered immediately. Yes, Independently verified during prior intellectual property proceedings. The analyst nodded slowly. Dr. Morris continued carefully. Documentation alone doesn't necessarily address behavioral concerns. Tanner clicked another folder open. Work history and performance reviews. Commercial maintenance records. Emergency response commendations. Supervisor evaluations. No disciplinary actions. No instability reports. No HR complaints. No workplace incidents. Over 15 years of employment history describing the same traits repeatedly: reliable, quiet, methodical, detail-oriented. One Stonevale attorney looked up. These records directly contradict the characterization we received. Tanner said nothing. He simply opened the next folder. Social Communication Archive. The room grew quieter immediately. Grant took over briefly. These are chronological records gathered over several years, he explained. Messages, emails, group communications, and contemporaneous notes. Emily stared down at the table while several emails appeared on screen. Lauren's language patterns became obvious within minutes. Not accusations, framing, subtle emotional positioning before social events. Tanner's been difficult lately. He isolates himself sometimes. Please be patient with him tonight. I worry people misunderstand what I deal with privately. Dr. Morris narrowed her eyes slightly. Interesting. Jason finally spoke. It worked too. Everyone looked toward him. Jason leaned forward. She never outright accused Tanner of anything. That's why none of us questioned it hard enough. Emily closed her notebook slowly. Because concern sounds responsible, she added quietly. That sentence hung heavily in the room. Tanner remained silent while old messages continued appearing across the screen. Canceled invitations, shifted social dynamics, private conversations, patterns, always patterns. One Stonevale analyst reviewed a message timestamp carefully. This email was sent before the dinner where multiple witnesses later reported concerns regarding Mr. Perry's emotional state. Grant nodded. Correct. The analyst looked back toward Lauren's wording. She preconditioned interpretation beforehand. Nobody answered immediately, because that was exactly what happened. Dr. Morris removed her glasses briefly. Mr. Perry, she asked carefully, why did you preserve all this? Tanner looked toward the windows overlooking downtown Denver. Snow drifted slowly beyond the glass. Then he answered, because memory changes once groups become emotionally aligned. The room stayed silent after that. Not dramatic silence, professional silence. The kind created when someone says something difficult but accurate. The review shifted next toward North Peak itself. Megan projected operational records from the company's first 4 years: revenue scaling, employee retention, client stability, infrastructure performance metrics, crisis response histories. Nothing in the records resembled instability. Actually, the opposite. North Peak's expansion patterns looked unusually disciplined for a rapidly scaling infrastructure company. Controlled growth, conservative financial exposure, documented contingency planning. Tanner's leadership style appeared almost excessively methodical. One acquisitions director actually laughed quietly while reviewing a 73-page operational risk assessment Tanner personally wrote during North Peak's second year. You planned disaster responses for scenarios that never happened. Tanner answered simply, they could have. Megan smiled faintly. That's basically his entire personality. Even Dr. Morris almost smiled at that. By early afternoon, Stonevale's internal tone had changed noticeably. The questions became less skeptical, more investigative. Toward Lauren, Grant introduced the next folder carefully. External interference documentation. Inside sat summaries of Lauren's recent contact attempts involving Stonevale executives. Dinner records, phone logs, email timestamps, witness summaries from the Brown Palace reception. Jason leaned back heavily. She tried attaching herself to the company first, he said, then attacked Tanner once proximity failed. Emily nodded slowly. That tracks. One Stonevale attorney reviewed Richard Ellison's written summary from the Cherry Creek dinner. He specifically noted emotional implication without factual allegations. Grant folded his arms. Because factual allegations create legal exposure. The attorney looked up sharply. Exactly. That was the point. Lauren operated socially, not evidentially, enough implication to create hesitation, not enough specificity to trigger immediate liability. Except now, the environment had changed. This wasn't a friend group anymore. It was corporate acquisition review. And corporations trusted documents more than emotional impressions. Usually. Dr. Morris tapped her pen thoughtfully. Has Ms. Whitaker Perry made any direct ownership claims against North Peak Grant? Opened another file immediately. During divorce proceedings? Yes. The room shifted again. Court transcripts appeared on screen. Stephanie Cole's arguments. Lauren's attempts to frame Tanner's software development as marital intellectual property. Then Robert Whitmore's documentation responses, dismantling those claims line by line. One Stonevale analyst looked genuinely stunned while reading the records. She challenged ownership after publicly minimizing the project. For years, Tanner finally answered. She changed positions once the software became valuable. Nobody disputed that. At 3:42 p.m., Grant introduced the final document set. Independent character and operational references. Hospital administrators. Commercial property executives. Logistics directors. Emergency systems coordinators. Every statement described Tanner similarly. Calm under pressure. Exceptionally reliable. Reserved but highly effective. No one described volatility. No one described instability. Actually, several references specifically praised Tanner's emotional consistency during high-stress infrastructure failures. One pharmaceutical logistics executive wrote, "Perry is probably the calmest systems operator I've worked with in 20 years. Jason looked toward Tanner after that one. You really never told anyone what you were building, did you? Tanner shrugged slightly. I was busy building it. That answer almost made Emily laugh despite everything. By late afternoon, the review had effectively reversed direction entirely. Now Stonevale's attorneys asked questions about potential reputational damage caused to North Peak by Lauren's interference. Grant handled those carefully, measured, professional. But underneath the professionalism, Tanner sensed something else in the room now. Embarrassment. Not from Stonevale, from the people who once believed Lauren too quickly. Especially Emily. Especially Jason. Especially Grant. The old social story surrounding Tanner Perry had relied on one assumption. Quiet men must be hiding weakness. Now the records suggested the opposite. Tanner had been the only person documenting reality while everyone else reacted emotionally around him. As the meeting finally concluded near evening, Dr. Morris closed her notebook slowly. "Mr. Perry," she said carefully, "I've conducted executive behavioral assessments for 17 years. Tanner waited. She studied him directly now. "In my professional opinion, your former spouse appears highly skilled at narrative influence." Grant glanced toward the table silently. Dr. Morris continued, "And in my professional opinion, you responded by building systems instead of arguments." For the first time all day, Tanner leaned back slightly in his chair. Not relief, just fatigue. Because the process itself felt familiar now. People only believed him after paperwork became impossible to ignore. Dr. Morris stood. "So unless further evidence appears," she said, "I'll be recommending Stoneville proceed with acquisition discussions." Jason exhaled loudly. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Megan looked ready to frame the sentence on the wall. Grant simply nodded once. But before anyone relaxed fully, one Stonevale attorney lifted a hand. "There's one more issue." The room quieted again immediately. The attorney adjusted his glasses while reviewing several printed emails. These communications involving Ms. Whitaker Perry and attorney Stephanie Cole. Grant frowned slightly. "What about them?" The attorney slid one page slowly across the table. "Someone may have crossed from social interference into actionable misconduct." Tanner looked down at the email, and for the first time that entire day, even he felt the atmosphere change, because Stephanie Cole's name attached to legal strategy changed everything. The email had been sitting unnoticed for nearly 4 years, buried inside archived legal correspondence, ignored because no one had reason to look at it closely before. Now it sat projected across the conference room wall at North Peak headquarters while 6 attorneys read it in complete silence. Stephanie Cole's message was short. Too short. That was what made it dangerous. If Tanner's reputation becomes a concern publicly, it may help discourage future claims regarding the software issue. No direct instructions, no explicit conspiracy, just implication. Again, everyone in the room recognized the pattern by now. Emotional positioning, strategic ambiguity. The Stonevale attorney adjusted his glasses slowly. "When was this sent?" Grant checked the metadata. 3 weeks before the divorce finalized. Emily stared at the screen in disbelief. She was already planning reputational damage during settlement negotiations. Jason muttered something under his breath that sounded expensive. Tanner remained still. The old version of himself might have reacted emotionally here. Not anymore. Now he simply watched systems reveal themselves. Grant folded both hands carefully on the table. "The issue isn't just the email," he said. "It's the timing combined with recent acquisition interference." One Stonevale legal advisor nodded. "If Ms. Whitaker Perry knowingly attempted to disrupt acquisition proceedings using previously disputed personal narratives," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood the implications. Defamation exposure, tortious interference, violation of settlement provisions, potential legal discovery. That last one mattered most, because discovery meant records, and records favored Tanner. Always had. The meeting ended 30 minutes later with Stonevale requesting temporary confidentiality while internal counsel reviewed liability exposure. As soon as the executives left, Jason stood abruptly. "That's it," he snapped. "We go after her now." Grant stayed seated. "No." Jason turned sharply. No, no emotional reactions. She tried sabotaging an $84 million deal, and reacting emotionally helps her. Jason looked ready to argue again. Then Tanner spoke quietly from the far end of the table. Grant's right. Jason stared at him. She's escalating because she thinks uncertainty creates leverage. Tanner continued. If we overreact publicly, she gets exactly what she wants. Megan leaned against the whiteboard. So what's the move? Grant answered immediately. We proceed structurally. That became the phrase repeated over the next week. Proceed structurally. No public statements, no angry emails, no interviews, just documentation. Grant assembled a legal review team through his firm. Emily coordinated acquisition risk assessments with Stonevale. Megan organized archived communications between Lauren and former mutual friends. Jason handled operational protection. Because Jason understood something important. People only targeted infrastructure when they believed the operators would panic. North Peak refused to panic. 3 days later, Grant discovered the clause. The divorce settlement's non-disparagement provision sat buried inside page 43 of the original agreement. Most people barely remembered those clauses after signing. Grant did not. He reread every line twice before calling Tanner directly. You need to come downtown. Tanner arrived at Holloway and Pierce LLP just after sunset. Grant's office overlooked Civic Center Park through tall glass windows reflecting Denver's city lights across dark, polished floors. Emily and Megan were already there. Jason arrived 2 minutes later carrying coffee and visible irritation. Grant closed the office door, then slid the settlement agreement across the conference table. Read paragraph 12. Tanner scanned the clause silently. Neither party shall knowingly engage in statements or conduct intended to damage the personal or professional reputation of the other party. His eyes stopped halfway down the paragraph. Including interference with future business relationships arising from knowingly false or misleading representations. Jason leaned back slowly. Oh, that's beautiful. Emily shook her head. She signed this. Yes, Grant said calmly, with Stephanie Cole present. Megan looked toward Tanner. She violated it the second she contacted Stonevale. Grant nodded once, probably earlier. For several seconds, nobody spoke, not because the situation felt dramatic, because it felt inevitable. Lauren spent years operating socially where ambiguity protected her. But contracts operated differently. Contracts cared about wording. And Grant Holloway lived inside wording professionally. Jason finally broke the silence. So what happens now? Grant opened another folder. We send formal notice first. Emily frowned slightly. And if she keeps pushing, Grant looked at Tanner before answering. Then we escalate. Everyone looked toward Tanner after that, because technically this was his decision. Not legal. Personal. Tanner stood near the office windows overlooking downtown traffic below. Snow drifted lightly through orange streetlights outside. 4 years earlier, he might have wanted revenge. Now the feeling seemed smaller somehow. Distant. What Lauren destroyed socially had already been rebuilt structurally. North Peak existed. The company mattered. Employees depended on it. Clients trusted it. None of that disappeared because Lauren refused to let go of an old narrative. Tanner finally turned back toward the room. Proceed. Grant nodded once immediately. That single word activated everything. The cease and desist letter went out the next morning, professional, measured, precise, no emotional language, just documented facts, violation of settlement agreement, interference with active acquisition proceedings, potential liability exposure, request for immediate cessation of defamatory communications. Stephanie Cole received copies too. 48 hours later, Lauren's PR firm lost a major client. Not because North Peak contacted them, because Stonevale's legal review quietly circulated concerns through investment networks. High-value real estate clients hated reputational instability, especially PR instability. By Friday afternoon, Redstone Realty Group terminated Lauren's consulting contract. The official reason cited strategic restructuring. Nobody believed that. Natalie Brooks called Emily that night, crying. Emily stepped outside her condo balcony overlooking Capitol Hill while snow collected along the railing. "Natalie, I didn't know," Natalie whispered. Emily stayed quiet, because part of her still felt angry enough not to comfort anyone. Natalie continued shakily. "Lauren told me Tanner was unstable, that he scared her emotionally. I thought," her voice cracked slightly, "I thought I was helping." Emily closed her eyes briefly. "You spread it too." "I know." That was the first honest sentence Natalie said. The silence afterwards stretched painfully. Then Natalie asked quietly, "Did Tanner hate us?" Emily looked out across downtown Denver lights. "No," she said softly. "That's the worst part, because he didn't." Tanner never launched counterattacks socially after the divorce. Never publicly humiliated Lauren. Never tried manipulating mutual friends back toward him. He simply documented reality while continuing to work. That restraint now looked almost terrifying in hindsight. Natalie cried harder after Emily told her about the audit records, the documentation, the timelines, the years Tanner spent quietly building North Peak while everyone else accepted Lauren's interpretation without verification. "We were awful to him," Natalie whispered. Emily rested one hand against the cold balcony railing. "Yes." Meanwhile, Tanner remained inside North Peak headquarters long after midnight reviewing infrastructure expansion proposals. The legal situation unfolded around him now like weather. Important, but secondary. At 1:13 a.m., Megan walked into his office carrying 2 coffees. "You know, Lauren's probably panicking right now." Tanner kept reviewing thermal infrastructure maps. "Probably. That's all you have to say." He finally looked up. "What exactly would change if I got angry now?" Megan studied him quietly. Because that question revealed the largest difference between the old Tanner and the man sitting in front of her tonight. The divorce once isolated him emotionally. Now it clarified him. Tanner no longer confused emotional reaction with progress. Megan handed him the coffee. "You really did move past it." Tanner considered that carefully, then shook his head once. "No." Megan frowned slightly. "No, I just stopped needing people to admit what happened before continuing." That sentence stayed with her long after she left the office, because it explained North Peak completely. Tanner Perry built companies the same way he survived betrayal. Quietly, methodically, without waiting for permission or apology first. 3 days later, Lauren Whitaker Perry received a formal mediation notice from Holloway and Pierce LLP. Mandatory legal review, contract violation discussion, acquisition interference assessment. The mediation would occur Friday afternoon downtown. Lauren arrived early, and when she entered the conference room, she stopped walking immediately. Because sitting beside Tanner Perry were Grant Holloway, Emily Carter, and Jason Mercer, the same people she once convinced to cut him off completely, now seated behind him, legally, professionally, structurally. And for the first time since the divorce began years earlier, Lauren looked genuinely uncertain. The mediation took place on the 32nd floor of Whitmore Legal Group, overlooking downtown Denver. Cold rain streaked across the windows all afternoon. Traffic crawled below through wet intersections, while gray clouds pressed low over the city skyline. Lauren Whitaker Perry arrived 11 minutes early. Control through timing, still the same. She wore a cream-colored coat over a dark charcoal dress and carried herself with the calm composure Tanner remembered from charity galas and real estate events years earlier. But when the conference room doors opened, that composure faltered. Not dramatically, just enough, because Tanner Perry sat at the far end of the polished walnut table beside Robert Whitmore, and behind him sat Grant Holloway, Emily Carter, Jason Mercer. Three people Lauren once quietly guided away from Tanner through years of implication and narrative shaping, now positioned directly beside him, not socially, professionally. The symbolism hit instantly. Lauren stopped for half a second near the doorway. Grant noticed. Emily noticed. Tanner noticed everything. Robert Whitmore rose first. "Ms. Whitaker Perry," he said calmly, "please have a seat." Lauren recovered quickly. Of course she did. People like Lauren survive through adaptation. She sat across from Tanner without looking directly at him initially. Stephanie Cole arrived moments later, carrying legal binders and visible tension. That tension interested Tanner immediately, because Stephanie finally understood something too. This was no longer family court. No sympathetic emotional framing existed here. Only contracts, records, liability. The room settled into silence as assistants closed the doors behind them. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Robert Whitmore folded both hands carefully on the table. "Thank you for attending voluntarily," he began. "Our objective today is resolving potential claims regarding interference with active business relationships and violation of prior settlement agreements." Lauren spoke first. "I think this entire thing is being exaggerated." Grant almost smiled at that. Almost. Because minimizing consequences had always been Lauren's first defensive instinct. Stephanie Cole cleared her throat. "My client denies intentionally interfering with any acquisition proceedings." Robert nodded once. "Good. Then, documentation should clarify matters quickly." That sentence shifted the atmosphere immediately. Lauren's eyes moved briefly toward Tanner. He remained still. No anger. No visible satisfaction. Just attention. The same attention he once gave malfunctioning systems while diagnosing failures. Grant opened the first folder. "We'll begin with timeline review." Over the next 40 minutes, the room moved carefully through documented events. The Brown Palace reception, Lauren's dinner with Richard Ellison, subsequent executive review delays, communication records, email timestamps. Stephanie Cole attempted several objections early. Grant dismantled them one by one, professionally, without emotion. That part bothered Lauren more than open hostility would have. Nobody in the room looked emotionally reactive anymore. The old social strategy depended on emotional ambiguity. But legal environments converted ambiguity into chronology. And chronology favored Tanner completely. Emily finally spoke during the financial review section. The acquisition delay created measurable exposure, she said calmly while sliding printed reports across the table. 3 institutional partners paused expansion commitments pending behavioral verification. Lauren looked genuinely surprised. Jason leaned back in his chair. Turns out implying a founder's unstable during an $84 million acquisition has consequences. Stephanie immediately responded. No direct allegations were made. Grant slid another document forward. No direct allegations were necessary. Lauren recognized the email instantly. The one discussing Tanner's emotional instability through implication rather than accusation. Her posture shifted slightly. Tiny adjustment, Tanner noticed. Always. Robert Whitmore spoke quietly now. The issue isn't whether Ms. Whitaker Perry explicitly accused Mr. Perry of misconduct. The issue is whether she knowingly attempted reputational interference through misleading implication. Lauren finally looked directly at Tanner for the first time. This is unbelievable. Tanner met her gaze evenly. No, he said calmly. It's documented. The sentence landed harder than shouting ever could have. Lauren folded her arms. So what exactly do you want from me? Nobody answered immediately, because strangely, revenge no longer interested Tanner very much. 4 years earlier, maybe. Back when he sat alone inside room 214, wondering how completely someone could erase a person socially. But now North Peak existed. The company mattered nationally. People trusted his systems with hospitals, warehouses, and infrastructure networks. Lauren no longer controlled the story. Reality did. Grant broke the silence. We want formal retraction of statements made to Stonevale representatives. Stephanie wrote notes quickly. Emily added calmly, we also require written confirmation that Ms. Whitaker Perry will cease contacting North Peak investors, partners, or acquisition affiliates. Jason leaned forward. And if she doesn't, litigation starts Monday. Lauren laughed once quietly. Not amused, defensive. You're acting like I committed some massive crime. Jason stared at her. No, he said. You just kept trying to destroy someone professionally after the divorce already ended. That hit. Lauren looked away first. Tanner remained silent through most of it, not passive, observing. He noticed how different the room felt now compared to years earlier. Back then, Lauren controlled emotional momentum socially because nobody challenged the framing quickly enough. Now, as every statement encountered verification immediately, evidence changed power structures. Robert Whitmore opened the final document packet. The proposed resolution includes non-disparagement, reaffirmation, communication restrictions regarding North Peak business relationships, and compensation for documented acquisition delays. Stephanie stiffened immediately. Compensation, Grant nodded once. Your client's interference triggered measurable financial review costs. Lauren looked toward Tanner sharply. You're seriously taking money from me now, Tanner answered quietly. No. She frowned. No. I'm preventing this from happening again. That answer unsettled her more than anger would have, because Tanner genuinely no longer sounded emotionally invested in punishing her personally, only structurally interested in containment. Lauren stared at him across the conference table. For several seconds, rain and distant traffic filled the silence. Then she spoke more softly. "You really hate me that much now?" Emily closed her eyes briefly. Because, even now, Lauren still translated consequences emotionally instead of factually. Tanner leaned back slightly. "I spent years thinking I needed people to admit what happened before I could move forward," he said calmly. Nobody interrupted. Tanner continued quietly. "But North Peak grew the second I stopped waiting." Lauren's expression changed subtly. Not guilt, exactly. Something closer to realization. The realization that Tanner no longer needed emotional closure from her to continue succeeding. That was the part she never predicted. For years, Lauren operated assuming social isolation would eventually weaken him enough to return seeking validation. Instead, isolation forced Tanner to build systems independent from social approval entirely. Grant checked the clock. "We need final signatures before Stonevale's board meeting at 5. That shifted the room again. Because ultimately, everything today still revolved around the acquisition. Business moved forward regardless of personal history. Stephanie spent 20 minutes reviewing terms privately with Lauren in an adjoining office. Through the conference room glass, Tanner watched them speaking intensely. Jason approached quietly beside him. "You okay, Tanner?" Looked out across rainy downtown Denver. "Yes." Jason hesitated. "I mean, really?" Tanner considered the question honestly, then nodded once. "Yeah." And surprisingly, that time it was completely true. Not because the past stopped hurting, but because the past no longer controlled direction. At 4:03 p.m., Lauren returned to the conference room. Her expression looked composed again, but thinner now. More tired. Stephanie placed the revised agreement on the table. One by one, signatures filled the pages. Lauren signed last. The sound of the pen against paper seemed unusually loud inside the room. Afterward, Robert Whitmore collected the documents neatly. "That resolves the matter pending compliance." Lauren stood slowly. For a brief second, it looked like she wanted to speak privately to Tanner. Maybe apologize. Maybe explain. Maybe reclaim something emotionally. Tanner never found out, because Grant stepped beside him immediately. Professional positioning, intentional. Lauren noticed that too. Of course she did. She glanced once toward Emily and Jason. Neither avoided eye contact anymore. That part seemed to affect her more than the legal outcome itself. The social structure had reversed completely, not through manipulation, through evidence. At 4:17 p.m., Tanner's phone buzzed. "Stonevale Capital. Richard Ellison." Tanner answered calmly. "Yes." Richard's voice carried clear, even through the speaker. "Congratulations," he said. "The board approved final acquisition authorization." Jason exhaled loudly. Emily smiled for the first time all afternoon. Megan nearly laughed in relief. Grant simply nodded once like he expected nothing else. Tanner looked out through the rain-covered windows across downtown Denver, while Richard continued discussing next steps. $84 million. National expansion. Institutional backing. Everything Lauren once implied he could never build. When the call ended, the room slowly relaxed for the first time all day. Lauren stood near the doorway, silently holding her coat. Then Tanner looked at her one final time. Not triumphantly, not cruelly, just clearly. And in that moment, Lauren finally understood the real reason she lost control of the story. Quiet men become dangerous when they stop trying to convince people who already decided not to listen. The acquisition closed 42 days later. No dramatic champagne celebration followed, no magazine cover photos, no loud speeches about disruption or innovation. That would have felt dishonest to Tanner Perry. North Peak Grid Systems officially entered partnership with Stonevale Capital on a gray Monday morning in downtown Denver, while freezing rain slid across the windows of a conference room 30 floors above the city. The final signatures took 11 minutes. Years of work reduced legally to initials and ink. Grant Holloway reviewed the last compliance page one final time before sliding the folder toward Tanner. "You're clear." Tanner looked down at the documents quietly. North Peak's valuation sat printed near the bottom corner. $84 million. The number still looked abstract, like a typo somebody forgot to correct. Megan nudged his arm lightly. "You should probably react somehow." Tanner signed the final page. "There. That's not reacting. It's legally binding." Jason laughed loudly from across the table. Emily shook her head, smiling into her coffee for the first time in weeks. Even Richard Ellison from Stonevale looked amused. That had become the strange thing about Tanner over the years. The larger North Peak became the less personally theatrical he seemed about it, because the company was never built for validation. It was built because systems kept failing and Tanner knew how to fix them. Everything else happened afterward. The new North Peak headquarters opened 3 weeks later near Lodo in a renovated industrial building overlooking the rail district. 5 floors. Operations center, engineering labs, national infrastructure monitoring, server rooms protected by redundant cooling systems Tanner designed himself. The company logo finally appeared professionally mounted in the lobby, despite Tanner insisting the old temporary sign worked fine. Megan ignored him and ordered the permanent installation anyway. North Peak employed 73 people now. That number disturbed Tanner more than the acquisition value. 73 salaries. 73 families depending indirectly on decisions he made. Responsibility felt more real to him than wealth ever did. The first board meeting after the acquisition happened on a snowy Thursday morning. Grant sat at the left side of the long walnut conference table, reviewing expansion contracts. Emily analyzed financial forecasts beside him. Jason argued with logistics consultants over warehouse integration priorities. 3 people who once stopped answering Tanner's calls. Now board members. The irony still lingered quietly beneath everything. Not bitterly anymore, just visibly. Megan entered carrying coffee and paused beside Tanner. "You ever think about that?" "What?" She nodded toward the boardroom. "The fact they all ended up working for your company after cutting you off." Tanner looked through the glass walls toward downtown Denver, disappearing behind snowfall. "No, that's a lie. Not a very important one." Megan studied him for a second, then realized he actually meant it. The social betrayal that once nearly destroyed Tanner emotionally no longer occupied central space in his thinking. Because North Peak had forced him into a different mental framework entirely. Infrastructure systems did not care about resentment. They either functioned or failed. People weren't completely different. That same afternoon, Tanner quietly authorized something nobody expected. Employee equity distribution, not symbolic shares, real ownership percentages. Megan nearly argued with him over the size of her allocation. "This is too much." "No," Tanner answered calmly. "It's accurate. You built North Peak. Not alone. That mattered deeply to him, because unlike Lauren Tanner, never confused visibility with contribution. Megan helped build North Peak when it still existed inside a motel room and unpaid invoices. Grant protected it legally before larger firms took it seriously. Emily stabilized its financial structure when scaling became dangerous. Jason opened logistics networks nationally. Real systems required multiple people functioning correctly together. Tanner understood that better than anyone. The media attention increased after the acquisition closed. Business magazines, podcasts, infrastructure conferences, articles describing Tanner Perry as the quiet engineer reshaping commercial energy systems. He ignored most of them. Megan forced him into 2 interviews total. During one recording, a CNBC host asked the question everyone seemed obsessed with, eventually. How did you handle being underestimated for so long? Tanner looked briefly off camera before answering. I stopped treating disbelief like an emergency. That quote spread across LinkedIn for weeks. Jason framed it in his office just to irritate him. Meanwhile, Lauren Whitaker Perry disappeared gradually from the professional circles she once moved through effortlessly. Not publicly destroyed. That would have created drama. Worse. Quietly excluded. Investment firms stopped calling. PR contracts dried up. Networking invitations slowed. People became careful around her once the Stonevale situation circulated privately through Denver business circles. Narrative manipulation worked well socially, less well around due diligence attorneys. Tanner heard occasional updates indirectly, never asked for them. One evening in early December, nearly 5 years after moving into Aspen Crest Extended Stay, Tanner drove back there alone after work. Snow covered the parking lot lightly. The neon vacancy sign still buzzed red above the office. Nothing looked different. That affected him more than he expected. He parked beside room 214 and sat silently inside the truck for several minutes. The same room where North Peak started still overlooked Interstate 25. Exactly the same way. Same yellow curtains, same flickering exterior light, same cracked concrete walkway. Only Tanner had changed. Eventually, he walked into the office. The night clerk looked barely 20 years old. Can I help you? Tanner reached into his jacket pocket slowly, then placed an old brass room key on the counter. The clerk frowned. Sir, I forgot to return it. The kid looked confused. When did you stay here? Tanner glanced once toward the second-floor balcony outside. A while ago. Then he walked back into the snow before further questions arrived. That night, Tanner ate dinner alone at the same diner near Blake Street where he once opened divorce papers before sunrise years earlier. Nothing there changed much either. Same cracked vinyl booze, same burnt coffee. Same waitress named Carla still working evenings. She poured his coffee automatically when he sat down. You finally buy a better truck yet? She asked. No. You rich tech people are weird. Tanner almost smiled. Outside the diner windows downtown Denver glowed beneath falling snow while traffic rolled slowly through wet intersections. Tanner ate quietly while reviewing infrastructure reports on his tablet between bites of eggs and toast. Normal. Calm. At 8:47 p.m., his phone rang. Unknown Chicago number. Tanner answered. This is Tanner. A man introduced himself as Senior Operations Director for a hospital infrastructure network across the Midwest. They had been studying North Peak's predictive load balancing systems for months. Now they wanted a meeting, potential national expansion, large-scale implementation. Tanner listened quietly while snow drifted beyond the diner glass. Years earlier, Lauren once told him nobody cared about utility software. Now hospital systems across multiple states wanted access to technology he built inside a motel room after everyone stopped believing in him socially. The director finished speaking. So he asked, "Would you be interested?" Tanner looked out toward the Denver streets, toward the city where he once walked alone through snow after people quietly erased him from their lives. Then he answered simply, "Yes." After the call ended, Tanner sat there a little longer with untouched coffee cooling beside his plate, not celebrating, not reliving the past, just listening to the diner sounds around him. Forks against plates, low conversations, traffic outside. Peace sounded smaller than people expected. Quieter, too. But Tanner finally understood something important. The opposite of humiliation was never revenge. It was usefulness. Because useful things survive disbelief eventually. And while Lauren spent years trying to manage how people perceived Tanner Perry, Tanner spent those same years building something reality itself could verify. In the end, reality lasted longer. Life has a strange way of exposing the difference between perception and truth. Some people are skilled at controlling rooms, conversations, and opinions. They can shape how others see someone long before facts ever appear. But eventually, real character shows up in patterns, in work consistency, restraint, and what a person builds when nobody is clapping for them. Tanner Perry never won by talking louder. He won because he kept records, stayed disciplined, and continued building while other people argued over appearances. Quiet people are often underestimated because they do not advertise their value constantly. But silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes it means focus. And in real life, many people know what it feels like to be misunderstood, excluded, or quietly pushed out of circles they once trusted. If that has ever happened to you, comment below. Have you ever had someone control the story about you before you even had a chance to speak for yourself? And if you enjoy stories about calm people who let time and truth do the heavy lifting, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story is about a man whose entire family mocked him for working night shifts until the reading of a will changed the room completely.